Good evening and welcome to the San Bruno City Council meeting of May 8th, 2018. Vicky, would you be as kind to take roll?
Councilmember Medina?
Here.
Councilmember O'Connell?
Here.
Councilmember Salazar?
Here.
Vice Mayor Davis?
Here.
Mayor Medina?
Here. May I ask from Jackie Spears' office, Brian Perkins, to lead us in the pledge? We have a couple announcements this evening. First, and of course, the 5th Annual Community Day in the City Park will be held on Sunday, June 3rd, at the park immediately following the 78th Annual Posey Parade, which begins at 11 a.m. on San Mateo Avenue at Keynes Avenue and goes from there along El Camino Real to Crystal Springs Road and ends up in San Bruno City Park. Second item. The City of San Bruno will hold its second public engagement open house and community meeting on the conceptual design for the new Recreation and Aquatic Center Thursday, May 17th from 3 to 5. A formal presentation and community meeting will follow at 6:30 p.m. Both the open house and community meeting will be held at the Veterans Memorial Recreation Center in City Park, which is located at 251 City Park Way. This is an honestly exciting new project for San Bruno and for all of us. So we encourage your participation in this conceptual design and get your feedback, and we look forward to seeing you. We have 3 presentations this evening. The first one is a proclamation declaring May 13th through the 19th, 2018 National Police Week in San Bruno, and announce the Police Recognition Day at Tanforan Mall to be held on Saturday, May 19th. And I do have a proclamation for this and for this evening. Sherry, where are you? There you are. I'm sorry, you were over there. If you could meet me at the podium. Can I get your
Sure.
through me because I didn't see you.
Oh, that's okay.
Oh, wait. Hold on. Got to do it right. And then you'll talk about Police Week and everything else.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor and council members. The San Bruno Police Department, partnered with the San Bruno Citizens Crime Prevention Committee, is once again holding our annual Police Recognition Day at the shops at Tanforan on Saturday, May 19th from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. This will be our 36th year of the event, which honors peace officers killed or disabled while serving their communities. This year, we have over 20 agencies participating. Come on out to meet your local peace officers, check out police vehicles, see canine demonstrations, or obtain crime prevention and recruiting information. The canine demonstrations will be at 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. in the main center court of the mall.
To the point. Thank you so very much. Look forward to it again. Chief, did you have any follow-up or anything you wanted to add? No. She did better than you could. Yes. Okay. Got it. Next presentation is a proclamation declaring May 20th through the 26th, 2018 as Public Works Week in San Bruno. And of course, our staff, where's Jimmy? Jimmy, everybody's ahead of schedule here today. My gosh. I'll let Jimmy, if it's okay. I'm going to ask Councilmember O'Connell to present this proclamation to you, and if you could let us know in regards to the upcoming event and what you have planned.
Thank you. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. Thank you very much for the proclamation. On behalf of the entire Public Works Department team, the team which I'm very proud to be a part of, we would like to thank you for this proclamation. The city has a group of dedicated public works staff who works very hard every day to provide the critical services and programs that our residents and community count on. There are a lot of tasks that our staff does daily, such as testing water quality to ensure it meets the regulated standards, quickly responding to and repairing water main breaks so that our residents and businesses will have continued water service, keeping our drain inlets free from debris to prevent any flooding, repairing potholes to provide smoother surface for cars to drive on, and cleaning sewer pipelines to ensure that it's continuously flowing to prevent any potential sanitary sewer overflows. We've completed a lot of projects this fiscal year and are in the process of improving the very much needed water and wastewater infrastructure so that the city can continue to provide a safe and reliable service to the public. We would like to also thank other departments in the city that support our department every day, and also the City Council for our continued support. This year, for the Public Works Week, staff will be holding an event similar to the Touch a Truck event held a couple of months ago. The thought is for staff to bring the vehicles we use in our daily operations to the schools and teach the students about the vehicles and the importance of public works operations. Staff has been in contact with the San Bruno Park School District and is confirming the event at each school sites. We'll also be holding another event similar to what we've done in the past during the summer at the parking lot adjacent to the City Park Pool, which has been very successful. Children from camps and residents are provided access to see our equipment also with live demonstrations and learn how the equipment work and how we use them. So we'll let you know once that date is scheduled. And thank you again.
Thank you, Jimmy. We have a presentation here. This is to receive a presentation on California's Senate Bill 450, elections, vote by mail voting, and mail ballot elections from the San Mateo Elections Office, which for this evening we have the Deputy Elections Officer with us. Thank you for being here. Welcome.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. We do have a presentation that we can put up on the screen, hopefully. Terrific. Thank you so much for putting that up. These are exciting times in San Mateo County in that we are leading the pack in the state of California under the California Voters' Choice Act. And so let's talk a little bit about the act and how that's impacting voting in San Mateo County and ultimately throughout the state of California. Let's see if this all... Oh, okay, this one's done. Okay, fine, thank you. I think we have it.
We got it?
There you go. Thank you. So what is the California Voters' Choice Act, or SB 450? First of all, it's landmark legislation that is effective January 1st, 2018, that fundamentally transforms elections to an all-mail ballot vote center model with ballot drop-off locations, and is part of a sweeping collection of election reforms that are designed to increase voter participation in the state of California. 14 counties have been selected to participate under the California Voters' Choice Act. There are 5 of these counties right now that are proceeding with implementation of the act for the June 5th election. They are San Mateo, Madera, Napa, Nevada, and Sacramento counties. And I'm proudly to say that San Mateo County is truly leading the pack on that because of our experience in conducting all-mail ballot elections for the state of California under AB 2028. Cover that in a little bit. Applicable elections. The Act applies to all elections, including presidential and gubernatorial elections. It's distinguished from the San Mateo County all-mail ballot election that we had in November 2017, which was under AB 2028, and that only applied to local elections. So if the election crossed the county line, we couldn't conduct the election as an all-mail ballot election. So it didn't apply to presidential elections, didn't apply to gubernatorial or Senate, or even congressional elections. It had to be a local election. This, however, is much broader. It applies to every election that's conducted, whether it's federal, state, or local. And the opportunity to participate in this program is discretionary at the local level. The California Voters' Choice Act election dates, we're targeting the June 5th statewide direct primary and also the November 6, 2018 general election. So what you see in terms of a model that's going to be implemented this June, we will carry that into the November election. The California Voters' Choice Act is just that. It is providing voters a choice or a variety of options to cast their ballots. The options are very simple. It's to vote by mail. Over 67% of the county's residents currently are permanent vote by mail registered voters. It also creates a vote center model where there will be vote centers sprinkled throughout the county, strategically placed along transportation corridors and population centers that will act as polling places. So what the act in essence does, it changes the traditional polling place election structure to a vote center election structure. Under a traditional polling place election, you will see 205 polling places generally throughout the county. Under the California Voters' Choice Act, you will see that there will be 39 vote centers, as I said, strategically placed throughout the county. There will also, with the vote centers, be ballot drop-off locations that are designated, and we'll cover those in greater detail in a moment. Let's talk a little bit about vote by mail. Every registered voter is mailed a ballot, and those ballots went out yesterday, so they should be in your hands this week, going through the mail. And what this does is it provides every registered voter the opportunity to vote from home, their office, and the convenience of their own private environments. You do not have to go to a vote center. You do not have to go to a polling place. You can vote from the convenience of your home. The beauty of it, it is also provided with a return envelopes that are postage paid. I might add, of all of the counties in the state of California participating in this election, we are the only ones that are providing postage paid envelopes. We're trying to make it as easy and convenient for all voters to send their ballots in. We've been complimented on the Secretary of State for doing that. The ballots will be provided in Spanish, Chinese, and English. And postmark +3 means that you can mail that ballot up through Election Day, as long as it's postmarked, by midnight on June 5th, and it's received in Election Central. By June 8th, that ballot will be cast and counted. Let's talk a little bit about vote centers. As I mentioned, vote centers are very, very similar to polling places, but they will provide a variety of services that polling places have not been able to do. And one of the key elements of vote centers is that under a traditional polling place election, you can only vote in the polling place that serves your precincts. In a vote center model, you can vote at any one of the county's 39 vote centers that are throughout the county. So if you work in San Bruno and you live in Redwood City, you can vote in San Bruno's voting center. You don't have to go home to vote in Redwood City. Early voting starts 29 days before Election Day. We just opened our vote centers yesterday. We have 4 vote centers, both in North County, Central County, and South County. And we also have one in East Palo Alto. Those are our 29-day vote centers. Those are not required under the California Voters' Choice Act. That decision to open vote centers 29 days before the election and to have these vote centers in place is an election decision that's made at the local level. The Voters' Choice Act deals with opening vote centers 10 days before Election Day, and I'll cover that in a moment. What is truly innovative about this process is that those vote centers will be open on 2 weekends before the election. It's the first time in the history of the state of California that a polling place and a voting center will be open on a holiday. So on Memorial Day, your vote centers throughout the county will be open to accept ballots and to provide services to the voters. At least one vote center will be provided in each city or town, and voters can receive replacement ballots, they can drop off their voted ballots, and they can receive a variety of services at the vote center. Vote centers will be housed not only in facilities that are convenient, but those that also provide the technology available to have access to the VoteCal database, which allows for immediate verification of voter status. That allows us to perform conditional voter registration for those voters that wish to actually registered to vote at a vote center. You couldn't do that in a polling place. You can do that at a vote center. And conditional voter registration, I'll cover that in a little bit, but voters will be able to register to vote all the way through Election Day. It'll be a conditional voter registration, and it will be a conditional provisional ballot that'll be provided. But unlike prior elections, where you had to register to vote 15 days prior to the election in order to participate in that election, conditional voter registration now allows voters to actually register to vote all the way up through Election Day. There will be provided multilingual and accessibility assistance, and there will be at least 3 accessible voting machines for every vote center, and those will be electronic voting machines. The vote center formula is 29 days before Election Day. As I mentioned, there'll be 4 vote centers. 10 days before Election Day, there'll be 1 vote center for every 50,000 registered voters. That equates to 9 vote centers will be open 10 days before Election Day. 3 days before Election Day, there will be 1 vote center for every 10,000 registered voters. That equals 39 vote centers throughout the county. In terms of ballot drop-offs, there will be 1 ballot drop-off location for every 15,000 registered voters. That equates to 26 that are required. However, we will have 28 deployed for this election throughout the county. Those that are exterior boxes will have military-grade material, very impressive boxes. They almost look like mini tanks sitting on the sidewalk there. Very secured drop-off boxes. This is a bird's eye view of the vote centers and ballot drop-off locations that will be deployed throughout San Mateo County. Just gives you an idea of the sprinkling of those facilities throughout the county. And as you can see, they're along the major transportation corridors, and 1 is allocated to each city. In San Bruno, their vote center locations will be on May 26th through June 5th. You will have 1 at Skyline College Building from June 2nd through the 5th. The 3-day vote centers, there will be 1 at City Hall in Conference Room 115. And you will have 1 ballot drop-off location May 7th through June 5th at the City Clerk's office on El Camino Real. Let's talk a little bit about the Elections Administration Plan. It requires each county that's going to participate in the California Voters' Choice Act to prepare a comprehensive elections plan that discusses in detail the specifics of the administration of the election in the county. We have our Elections Administration Plan, which is available. I believe all of you have received a copy of this, and it is online. It is extremely informative document regarding the California Voters' Choice Act and how it applies specifically here in San Mateo County. It's been developed in a collaborative manner with our Voting Accessory Advisory Committee, our Language Accessibility Advisory Committee. It also has an extensive voter education and outreach plan, and it has been approved by the Secretary of State. These are the methods that we will deploy, and we are currently doing it, to get the word out through public meetings, public service announcements, radio and television, social media, direct voter contact. You're going to see some more postcards that are going to be sent to each registered voter individually, website postings, and multilingual communications. Something that's new and innovative that was recommended by our millennial staff here. One of the things that I've noticed over the years in being involved in election is that perhaps one of the most important events of Election Day is to receive your I voted sticker. People that vote by mail generally go to the polling places and go to vote centers. Even though they have a mail ballot, they'll go in and drop it off just so they can get their I voted sticker. Well, the idea came out, why don't we provide a digital I voted sticker for those who vote by mail? So you can go on our website, you can go to the voter registration lookup in terms of your voter file, and once you have cast your ballot and it's been counted, this sticker will pop up and you can then use it as your digital signature in sending emails and other forms of communication to show that you have not only voted. There's also another sticker that'll pop up when you get online that will also show you a digital recognition of the years of service when you originally registered to vote in the county. So we'll have them in 5, 10, 15, and 20 years of service. So you can proudly show the number of years that you've been a registered voter, should you choose to do so. Vote center technology. This has been a very, very big subject over the last year in terms of the security of the election system and our facilities and our technology. For this election, we will use our existing electronic voting systems. We're going to deploy 400 E-Slate voting machines. That's approximately 10 voting machines in each vote center. We'll also have 210 laptops that'll have VPN and Wi-Fi connections. And in the 2020 presidential election, we are now planning the process of evaluating a new voting system that will be designed for a vote center environment that will probably move our electronic voting process to a paper voting system, back to the ballot, where you actually mark it on paper, and then it'll be scanned at the vote center and cast and counted in that manner. The ballot will be kept and put in a ballot box for ballot tracking purposes and chain of custody. As I mentioned, technology has been a real big area of discussion here. I would like to just basically say, in no uncertain terms, that our voting systems in San Mateo County are safe and secure. Keep in mind that when we talk about voting systems, there are two areas that voting systems are broken into. There is the voter registration system, which is managed by the state of California, called VoteCal. And then there is the voting tabulation system, which is managed locally by the county elections official. One's a tabulation system, the other one is a registration system. They are not connected, they are not online, and they are closed and encrypted systems. Very, very safe and secure process that we deploy in San Mateo County. These are some of the best practices that we have in place for those systems. And most of the issues that you've heard over the last year have dealt with the voter registration side of the equation. The vendor that we use, Hard InterCivic, has been in this business for our voting tabulation system for over 30 years in 18 states. Not one vote ever cast through that system has ever been compromised, not one. And so true is in San Mateo County since we deployed that system. It's now going on 12 years, a very safe and secure process. If there is an error, it is usually tracked back to a human error, not a voting system error. And it's been very rare and few and far in between that occurs. Conditional voter registration, I touched upon it, and that is the new law now allows people to vote all the way, to register to vote, and to actually vote all the way up through Election Day. And the system will be administered at the vote centers for all those who wish to participate in conditional voter registration. Here's our contact information. You are familiar with our website and our address and our phone numbers, and also the California Secretary of State's office is there. This information can be found online on our website, and it's just loaded with information. We hope that you will avail yourself of that opportunity to find out more about this election. And on that note, that concludes my presentation, and if you have any questions, it'd be my pleasure to answer them.
Thank you, Jim. Any questions from council? Yeah, Michael.
So just one question around about fraud prevention, and with all these ballots going out in the mail, and maybe some of them going to addresses where a voter used to live and no longer lives, or perhaps is deceased. How is can you tell us about the process of verifying that the ballots are actually coming back from the person it was intended to be from?
Very good question. Well, we have, we're again one of the few counties that have a return ballot address that comes directly back to us if the voter doesn't live there or is moved or is deceased. That ballot does come back to us. But let's say it doesn't. Let's say it stays there. Under vote by mail, you have a signature on file. And that signature, when you cast your ballot, you have to sign your ballot, of course. You have to sign the envelope. When that comes through, we actually have our voter registration database, and it comes up on screens. It goes through 3 or 4 different sets of eyes in terms of checkpoints to confirm whether the signature that we're seeing, that came through is the same signature that's on the voter registration card. So that's the first step through the process. We get the ballot, it's scanned for those signatures, and then it goes through our ballot, our signature scanning and verification unit. We have 10 or 15 people there that are on computers just doing that all day. If there is a question, then it's elevated up to a supervisor and a team that will determine whether that signature belongs to that person. If it doesn't, we will call that. We will call that voter, and we will attempt to make sure that we correct that process. But it's a very secure process that we go through.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? None. Thank you very much for your time and the
My pleasure.
presentation and information.
My pleasure, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Vicki, consent?
Item 5, consent calendar. All items are considered routine or implement an earlier council action and may be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion unless requested.
Michael? Any action from council?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and second to approve consent. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
No? Ayes have it. Thank you.
Through the chair, if we
Yes,
could.
please, Michael.
There was an item on consent, a resignation from one of our committee members, and I just wanted to acknowledge Mark Howard's service to the city and acknowledge that he had intended, I think, to do something, but his circumstances were accelerated, and he never, I guess, had an opportunity to come here and address us. So anyway, I just wanted to say thanks to Mark for his service and acknowledge all the work that he did on our traffic safety and parking committee. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, next public hearing, Vicki.
Item 6, public hearing. Public hearing, waiving the first reading, hold public hearing, waive first reading, and introduce ordinance enacting a 2.45% rate increase for Recology San Bruno garbage and recycling services to be effective July 1st, 2018, as outlined in the notice of proposed garbage and recycling rate increase to property owners and customers.
Mr. O'Leary.
Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, the subject of the public hearing is the ordinance enacting a 2.45% rate increase for Recology San Bruno. Recology San Bruno has requested an interim rate adjustment in accordance with their franchise agreement with the city, based on the change in consumer price index between January 1 and December 31st, 2017, and the increased contractual landfill disposal costs at Ox Mountain Landfill. In accordance with the franchise agreement, Recology requested an interim rate adjustment totaling 2.45%. This adjustment blends 80% of the change in CPI, amounting to 2.47%, and the percentage increase for disposal costs at 2.33% as an authorized pass-through expense. The net calculation for 2018-19 amounts to 2.45%. Monthly changes for a 32-gallon residential toter will increase by 72 cents from $29.37 to $30.09. Residents will be able to save about $6.50 by having a 20-gallon toter, and the new cost for the 20-gallon toter is $23.34. The recommended rates continue to reflect lower landfill costs resulting from shifting disposal sites from Hay Road to the Ox Mountain landfill in late 2016. Disposal and transportation costs remain lower than if the Hay Road site were still utilized. I might also mention to the council, as I mentioned before, that this switch in landfill has resulted in savings to city customers, but I just wanted to point out again, that based on the franchise agreement, there is actually a disincentive to the company to change disposal sites. So the company changed disposal sites for the benefit of the residents and not for their own benefit. Notices meeting the requirements of Proposition 218 have been sent to property owners and non-owner customers. On March 13th, 2018, the City Council directed staff to proceed with a notification process covering this proposed change in garbage rates. The notices were mailed on March 23rd, giving the time and location of today's public hearing, and that began the 45-day permitted protest process. As of included in the agenda packet, the city clerk's office and the city received a total of 29 protests. Copies of those 29 have been included in the packet. In addition to the 29, 7 have been received since the time that the packet was prepared. So the grand total is 36 protests, and I believe copies of the additional 7 have been provided to the City Council. I did want to also point out that when all was said and done, the cost for mailing these notices, again, to property owners and non-owner customers was $8,745. The city will pay this cost and then will be reimbursed according to the requirements of the franchise agreement from San Bruno, from Recology San Bruno, for the cost of this notice. Kirsten Pinoki from Recology San Bruno is here and could answer any questions or make comments. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions the City Council might have.
Questions from council? Comments, questions? Marty.
In the past, I voted against increases. During the contract extension, I voted for it. And when I voted for it, it was with the understanding that Recology has a good service record. Also that to attempt to not extend the agreement would have been costly. And I believe at that time it was stated about $300,000 to go out to bid to try to get another contractor on board. So it is my understanding that each garbage contract has these automatic increases in the contract that allow that each city has to go through and approve of the allowed increases. Can either yourself or have somebody else in the audience explain how that if that's true and how that typically works?
I'm not sure I'm an expert in that question, but I've had the opportunity to look at a number of franchise agreements in San Mateo County in particular, and each one that I've looked at has some form of annual rate adjustment process. It could be ours, the city of San Bruno's, as you well know, has a combination of methodologies. One is the detailed rate year, and then separately and differently is an interim rate year. This particular one is a rate year. Some of them don't have that complexity and simply have some adjustment based on CPI, some ours for the interim is essentially 80% of CPI. Some of them are CPI, some of them are a percentage of CPI. All of the ones that I have looked at have some provision for rate adjustments on an annual basis. In recognition, I believe for the fact that the operating costs for the franchise holder goes up every year, either from disposal cost or labor cost or whatever it is. So based on the theory, at least, that the costs are going up, the franchises allow for rate adjustments to cover those costs.
And lastly, in the staff report, it has a listing of the rates that the other cities are paying, and San Bruno sits pretty much ninth out of the 16. So the top end being $50 a month, the lower end being $21.24, and the proposed rate is $30.09.
And the rates that are listed there were the rates that were in place back when we did the 218 notice back in March. I would again believe many or most are in some process of being adjusted, and we haven't attempted in the middle of council actions and so forth to presume what each city will do. So we haven't adjusted the rates. I would suspect, if you look historically, after the adjustments are concerned, San Bruno will continue to be in the middle of the pack as far as the 16 other agencies that are listed there.
Thank you.
Other questions before I open public hearing?
Through the chair.
Michael.
Okay. I wanted to acknowledge the people that did submit a protest, the 36 people, and I'm sure that all of us up here on the dais read through all the proposals. I advocated for expanding the inclusion of the noticing to a broader group, and still we didn't get very many comments on it. But I did want to acknowledge that we do take these things into consideration, and we are contractually obligated to do these increases, although the law would prevent us from doing it if we did get enough protests. But I did want to acknowledge that. And for just one point of clarification, something I saw in this group and I've seen in previous protests are the concerns from people that are on fixed incomes. And I was wondering if we could address, what the city is able to do for people that are in limited income situations, and if we were providing a reduced rate for them, and what the process might look like for that.
Recology could probably answer even better than I could, and I would just make two comments. One is allowance for the 20-gallon can is a relatively new option provided in San Bruno, and I think it was developed in recognition, especially single-person households and so forth, where there's small garbage capacity need, that the option to the 32 gallons. So that is $6.50 a month lower option. In addition to that, the city does provide for people that meet an income limit a 25% reduction in the rate for low income. There's a minimally invasive process to apply to the finance department for an individual that believes they might be eligible for that and could take advantage of that. So I would say that the two aids that are provided would be the 20-gallon can and the low-income discount that is available. And I know Recology does promote both of those through their newsletters and in their direct contacts with their customers, and that would be my answer.
Okay. No, thank you. That answers the question. And if somebody were interested in the 25% reduction, is that information on our website, or could they call the city clerk's office and get that?
I don't know. I'll check. It should be, but I believe it is, but we'll re-verify.
Just was going to say.
But again, but contacting the finance department, there's a one-page application that is required, and it's done on an annual basis, and we send out pieces in our mailings that give the directions and so forth. But I'll verify about the low income, but I believe it's on the website.
My question would just be real quick, you could just acknowledge from there, is that these protest letters, if they do make mention of that, they are being reached out to for those option and opportunities, since all may not have availability or access to a computer?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Other questions? This is a public hearing. Vicki, were there any speaker cards? Okay, were there any persons in the audience that wanted to speak on this item? Please, Raina.
Good evening, Raina, Florida Avenue. I don't know if it's working, but anyhow, thank you, Michael, for addressing your question. That was one of my questions that I had. I also have a question regarding, we are only talking about the 20-pound garbage cans. That doesn't include the compost. Do we get charged for compost and recycling as well? I don't know if that's the question, or just the garbage. The 20 pound
Separate.
for homeowners or low income fund. Can someone answer that question? It was kind of a question.
Okay, we'll get all the questions from the audience.
And
then
my
we'll answer
second
those.
thing is, yes, the increase. Is that going to be yearly? Because then San Bruno will be impossible to live here especially for senior citizen, for low income family, and we need to accommodate, these families. So I would like to see if that is being addressed as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If there are other persons that do want to speak, if they can go to the podium.
Hi. Is it on? My name is Karen Formasini, and I have a question. I have one of the larger blue container. Now, if I would want to go down to a smaller one, do I have to pay for the smaller one, or will I just have an exchange for this?
That's for the recycling?
Yes, for
Okay.
the recycle.
We'll get that answer for
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Other persons from the audience want to speak on this topic? This is a public hearing. If I do close a public hearing, it'll move this process forward and preclude you from speaking again. So I just want to check the room one last time. Action from council.
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We had 3 questions that were asked. I'd like to get those addressed. The question was in regards, are we dealing specifically with the garbage, or is this also in the compost and recycling? Is that held separately, or how does that collectively charged? I think that was the first question.
I think Kirsten should go to the podium, but I would say that people are eligible for garbage, recycling, and green waste service, and you get all 3 without regard if you have the 32-gallon or the 20-gallon. So you get recycling with a 20-gallon or with the 32-gallon equally.
Good job, Jim. Yes, the garbage rate is based on the size of the garbage cart only. So it doesn't matter what size of recycling or compost that you use. Your monthly rate is based on the size of the garbage can that you subscribe to. And to answer the blue recycling cart, you can have a smaller recycling cart if you wish, and we do not charge. So if you want to give me your address, I can make that happen, or you can call our office and we can have that swapped out for you.
Okay, I think the final question was just about, and I think Councilmember Medina kind of already alluded to this, but just to make it clear, this was in regards, is there going to be an annual increase? Or is that how, which again would be back to the agreement?
The franchise agreement provides for the opportunity for the garbage company to apply for an annual increase during the term of the franchise agreement.
Michael?
I was just going to add, Jim, that increase varies depending on inflation and the costs associated with the, so more of an addition. Yeah.
Footnote?
Yeah.
I think that
Yes, it is not a set amount. We don't know what next
it
year's.
could be 1 point, it could be 2 point.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay. Okay, those are the 3 questions that I think I received from the audience. I want to make sure that that was answered this evening. Other questions or comments from council on this topic? Laura?
I would just like to echo, I think, the council members' comments, and that is that we do take into consideration letters, comments. And this is an ongoing process, whether it's the garbage rates, whether it's sewer rates, water rates. Went to fill up my gas tank yesterday at the gas station, and price of gases are going up too. So we do consider these. We do care about this, and we understand the fixed incomes. I think there's been a lot of movement toward low-income rate assistance programs, and I think that as a resident who's on a fixed income, all your utility companies, whether it's water, the garbage, they all offer low-income rate programs. PG&E also offers a care program, so I think there are resources out there to help you with those who are on fixed income.
Any other comments from council? Okay, we have before us a waiving of the first reading and the introduction of the ordinance. Is there any action from council?
Move to waive the first reading.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's been a motion made and seconded to waive the first reading. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, any action on the ordinance?
I'll move to introduce the ordinance.
Vicki?
Councilmember O'Connell,
Aye.
Councilmember Medina,
Aye.
Councilmember Salazar,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Davis,
Aye.
Mayor Medina.
Aye. And also why as we get off this topic, not just the garbage rates, but also water, sewer, the utilities are also under that same availability to those who are on a fixed income and meet that criteria. So it's not just for garbage, it's for all of the utilities that the city has had and has done that for some time. So just so you know. Okay, there are no reports of commissions, boards, and committees. Vicki, number 8.
Public comment on items not on the agenda. It is the council's policy to refer matters raised in this forum to staff for investigation and/or action where appropriate. The Brown Act prohibits the council from discussing or acting upon any matter not agendized pursuant to state law.
Thank you, Vicki. Any cards? No. Any persons from the audience that want to speak on anything that's not on the agenda this evening? Okay. Then we're going to move on to conduct.
Item 9, conduct of business. 9A, receive report from Joint City Council and Traffic Safety and Parking Committee Subcommittee regarding recommendations for a residential parking permit program.
And there was a subcommittee of 4 members, and one, as we know, has departed, is not here this evening. But we drew straws, and we didn't actually give Tom a straw. We just gave him this nod to represent and to present that to you this evening. And before you begin, for Mark, who's not here today, but to you, a lot of work has gone in, a lot of meetings, a lot of passion and dedication to the presentation, and Tom has done a lot of that work, so very much appreciated.
Thank you very much. Okay. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Tonight we're the Joint Parking Subcommittee made up of Mayor Medina, Councilmember Medina, myself, Tom Hamilton, and our recently retired member of the TSPC, Mark Howard. Our recommendations for a residential parking permit program for the city of San Bruno. So tonight, we're going to present our findings from our many meetings on how the city might implement a residential parking permit program. You'll see the RPPP throughout the presentation because it's difficult to say residential parking permit program for neighborhoods in San Bruno. The recommendations of the subcommittee are based on study of parking permit programs from neighboring cities on the peninsula. And the information that you'll see tonight was presented to the TSPC in our February meeting. And the subcommittee has amended the presentation to incorporate feedback from the TSPC and from the general public. So I'll briefly go over what the goals of a program should be as we agreed. what our proposed process for how a program could be implemented in a specific neighborhood, other details of a program. We'll go through, unrelated to parking permits, other recommendations for how the city might increase parking inventory, and then we'll have a discussion after that. So, goals. So we agreed that any residential parking permit program that the city adopts should increase the quality of life in the neighborhoods that have been negatively impacted by outside parking generators. This term outside parking generators will come up a few times. It's an important thing to address because when you think about parking permits, if you have a neighborhood that has some kind of outside source of cars that are coming into the neighborhood, that's what we mean by an outside parking generator, whether it be public transit or retail or businesses or other, any other outside source that are bringing cars that, into a residential neighborhood where those cars do not belong to the people who live in that neighborhood. It's really important to consider this because if you have a neighborhood that already has too many cars just because of the density in the neighborhood, a parking permit program can't help. So it's just something to consider. Continuing with the goals, any program needs to be accessible to the impacted neighborhoods that request it. So there needs to be a clear, defined process for requesting, designing, and implementing a parking permit program in each neighborhood, and we'll go through our proposal for that. It needs to be flexible to meet the differing needs in differing neighborhoods. So there's no one-size-fits-all. You can't have, a parking permit program only works from 8 to 5, because that might work in one neighborhood. It may not work at all in another neighborhood. Each neighborhood will have different needs, and the program needs to be flexible. And we also want to leverage the success of programs in neighboring cities. So we did a lot of studying of our neighbors and their various programs to see what worked and what didn't work for them. So this is the process that we propose for implementing a program in a specific neighborhood. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because on the next slides we talk about each of these boxes in detail. So it starts up there at the top left where a resident of a particular neighborhood would file an application with Public Works to start the process. Then the Public Works would do an initial survey in the neighborhood to gauge the popularity of the idea. An initial petition would require 50% plus one of respondents to support. And then if that is achieved, then we'll move on to the staff study. We'll talk about this in more detail, in all these boxes in more detail as we move ahead. Then the staff performs their study and puts together a detailed proposal for what the permit program should look like in that particular neighborhood. And then staff presents that and in a survey back to the residents again to determine the support for that proposed program. And at this point, we'd be looking for a 50% response rate and 67% support. If that is achieved, then the Public Works Director would sign off on the proposal. It would go to the TSPC where it could be approved or denied. And any decision from the TSPC, as with any decision that we make, can be appealed to the City Council. So we'll go through all this in detail on these next slides. So back at the beginning, the resident would file an application with Public Works, including the proposed permit area boundaries and identification of an outside parking generator to start the process. And the staff would assist the resident and verify the proposed boundaries meet legal and logical criteria. So a couple things here. One, we want to make sure that there aren't competing proposals for the same neighborhood and having staff do double or triple work. So that's why we want to kind of centralize the start of the process, and also have staff assist the resident in figuring out where the boundaries of a particular area could be, because it needs to make sense. You can't cut off a permit zone in the middle of a block. You can't draw it around your neighbor you don't like. It has to meet legal and logical criteria. The next step would be a resident petition with at least 50% plus one of all of the units in the impacted area would be required before a staff study is started, unless directed to complete a study by the TSPC or the City Council. So when we brought this up at the TSPC meeting in February, some residents expressed concern that a 50% response rate might not be realistic. However, the committee recommends that the city only invest in studying the feasibility of a program if it's clear that a majority of residents are in favor of it. These studies can be quite involved and quite expensive, and we don't want to have staff doing these expensive studies if there's not clear support for the program in the proposed neighborhood. So that particular staff study would include, but not be limited to, the following: determination of the proposed permanent enforcement days and times, determination of any incremental cost to the city for implementing and enforcing the proposed area. And then now we're talking about how many permits. So staff and some of the subcommittee recommended conducting an inventory of on-street spaces and the number of households in the proposed permit area, and derive a formula to determine the number of permits that each household may obtain. In most impacted areas, this formula would likely result in allowing no more than 2 permits per household. So some of us on the subcommittee, as well as many residents who came to the TSPC meeting in February, recommended exploring a system of either 1 permit per licensed driver residing in a permit area, or 1 permit per vehicle registered to an address in the permit area. This would likely result in more permits being granted than there would be available spaces, but it would have the effect of eliminating vehicles from outside parking generators from the permit area. As you need to be really clear on this one, staff and some of the members of the GSPC strongly recommend that the city must not, under any circumstances, issue more permits for an area than there are available public spaces. Some residents agreed with this and expressed concern that potentially paying for permits and then still not being able to find parking wouldn't be fair. So this is a point of contention, and there was much discussion of this, both within our subcommittee and with the public. Staff is very clear, and it makes perfect sense if you think about it. Why would we put out more, give out more permits than there are available spaces in a particular area? There's always going to be somebody who has a permit and can't park, and that is a completely legitimate concern. It's also true, however, that in most of the impacted areas, for the people that we've spoken to who would be interested in a parking permit program, that even if you wouldn't be guaranteed to have a space, eliminating all of the outside forces, all of the outside parking generators from the neighborhood would at least make things better. So that's the contention. I need to be very clear. Staff was very clear with us what their concerns were with this, and we were not even unanimous on our own subcommittee on this point. So I just wanted to be very clear on that point. All right. So once the program has been designed, we go back to the neighborhood, and a neighborhood survey would be mailed or distributed to residents in the proposed permit area. And that neighborhood survey must have a response rate of 50% or more, and at least 67% support from those returning the survey, or staff to recommend approval for any residential permit program to the Public Works Director. So that we need to have that level of support before it goes to the Director of Public Works. The Director approves or denies the request, then it goes to the final proposal, goes to the TSPC for approval, and then, as with any decision, I got cut off on that one. TSPC's decisions can be appealed to the City Council, is what that one reads on my version here. All right, other details. So the process for verifying eligibility and receiving a resident or caretaker permit from the city would need to be determined. Permit fees, if any, would need to be determined. There's all kinds of different ways the city could implement fees or not implement fees. The program would be designed to give staff the flexibility needed in order to design an appropriate program for each neighborhood that requests one. So we talked about that already, where it can't be a one-size-fits-all. That's why we need to have staff do that comprehensive study. And then any formula used to determine the number of permits per household and any permit fees, that needs to be uniform. So you can't charge more for permits in one neighborhood versus another, or allow more permits per household in one neighborhood versus another. The same formula needs to be uniform throughout the city. Also need to figure out how to implement visitor permits. If it's determined that visitor permits are needed, which likely they would be. Another point is the process for removing a previous established parking permit zone from a neighborhood would be virtually the same as the process for establishing one. It was just the exact same steps, but to remove instead of to implement. The city would need to explore what the penalties would be for misuse of parking permits. The subcommittee is particularly concerned about the potential abuse of visitor permits. And then this last bullet is actually incorrect. This should actually read: the appeals of TSBC decisions on proposed programs will go to the City Council, which is true with all of the decisions that the TSBC make. Last point, as mentioned throughout the process, we go back to the residents multiple times, and throughout the process, residents need to be informed all along that even with limits on the number of permits per household, the possession of a permit would not always guarantee the availability of a parking space in the permit area. It's absolutely not possible to guarantee you're going to have a space. So people need to be made aware of that throughout the process. The last part of the presentation tonight are additional recommendations for increasing the inventory of parking that we have. So this is outside of we're now outside the realm of parking permits, but these are things that we identified during our investigation of this topic. So the subcommittee recommends that the city explore solutions in addition to establishing residential parking permits, and these recommendations are aimed at increasing the available parking in impacted neighborhoods. We further recommend that the city explore these separately as soon as possible and not incorporate these recommendations into discussions on a possible permit program. The discussions of a permit program could go on, and it's very easy to get into circular arguments and all kinds of stuff. So we want to kind of separate these from the discussion of permits, because these are things that we feel that can be implemented rapidly and provide some immediate relief to our impacted neighborhoods. So these recommendations include offering a program where residents can increase their private parking inventory by widening their driveway and curb cut through a streamlined permit process and city contracted vendors with fixed pricing. Changing the current city code to allow side yard parking when doing so will not remove street parking. Allowing residents to request and pay for city-applied small red curbs up to 24 inches from the edge of their driveway on either side of their curb cut to allow easier access to their driveways. When doing so will not remove legal street parking. Number 4, for homes with driveways less than 18 feet from closed garage door to sidewalk, amend code requirements and reduce permit fees for reconstructing garage front to recess the garage door and lengthen their driveway, trying to get as many cars as possible off the street and into legal driveways. Number 5, increase outreach and enforcement to remove inoperable vehicles from driveways and increase off-street parking. Explore ordinance and enforcement options for keeping unattached trailers off the street in impacted neighborhoods. And then finally, recommend that the city paint pavement markings to delineate street parking spaces in impacted neighborhoods, but only when doing so will not reduce available parking. The goal is to prevent cars from occupying two spaces. So in this one here, if there is a curb that is sufficient length for two legal parking spots, paint the delineators to delineate those two parking spots. But if it's a shorter curb where you might be able to squeeze in two smaller cars, but those aren't legal spots, don't do anything. So that's the recommendation there. So that's the end of my presentation. Happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Again, thank you, Tom, very much for taking on the presentation and all of your work. It's appreciated. And at this time, I don't know, Marty, did you have any comments, or we want to hear from the colleagues or the audience? What would you, Marty, you run the subcommittee, what would you like to do?
Thank you. I think it's appropriate to hear the comments from the public. We spent a lot of time talking about this, and Mark and Mark Howard and Tom Hamilton, thank you very much for your work. I mean, you guys really pushed. As was stated in the presentation, we all didn't agree, and a couple times we even changed our minds. But at this point, I would like to hear from the public.
Okay. Is that all right with the rest of the council? Open it up? Okay. Is there any,
quickly,
I
before we
apologize,
open
Tom.
for
Yes,
public comment, I do also want to acknowledge the hard work by staff.
Absolutely correct.
In putting together all of our meetings and helping us with the various legal questions, and couldn't have done this without staff. So just wanted to acknowledge them as well. Sorry.
Well noted, and thank you for saying that, Tom. Are there any members from the public who have comments? Like to join in the discussion? If you do and you haven't filled out a card, but there are no cards, so if you could just please line up behind the podium, if we could do it all together, so we can save on time, I would appreciate it very much. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank the committee for their work on this. This is definitely an issue in our own neighborhood over in Bel Air. I was really pleased to see the curb cut proposal. That's something that we've been considering doing at our own home. Of basically, if we were to expand our driveway by like half a car length, we would take one car off the street. So you'd trade half a space for a full car off the street. Regarding the number of permits, I wonder, so we have a household where we have multiple adults. We have more than 2 adults in the household, all of whom drive. And in terms of counting the permits, it would be ideal for us if everybody in the household had a permit, and so whoever gets there first can take the driveway, and whoever isn't there first can park on the street. And I wonder whether that was considered, or whether that's, as you're thinking about this, whether counting the driveway spots and saying, well, okay, we're going to issue this household 4 permits, but at any given time, only 2 of them will be on the street, whether that sort of thing will be contemplated. Anyway, I appreciate your work.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hi, thanks. I'm Plymouth Ansbergs. I live with RO, so I'm going to echo all of those, some of those same comments. The thing I wanted to comment on is the issue of visitor parking permits, which my experience as having been a guest at friends' houses in places where they had restricted visitor parking is that, like, it's really hard for them to hold like parties, and I don't know what the thoughts are around things like that. But having like 1 or 2 visitor permits for like your occasional overnight guest is great. But like if you actually want to have a barbecue and invite your larger family, I think that needs to be taken into consideration. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, please.
This is Rain again. Okay, so thank you so much, and thank you to everyone who was involved in this very sensitive project. Okay, so for those who knows where Florida Avenue is basically it's a very small street, and some of us don't have a driveway. And the issue that we have is that no one can guarantee parking space in front of our house. We don't have a driveway. And we have 2 things. Enforcement will be one issue for us, my husband and Tim and I. Enforcement will be one, okay? So secondly is we have a very much of a problem from tenants on Milton and San Anselmo. So basically, they take in our parking on Florida, and I totally understand why, because it's one or two people living in one apartment and they have multiple vehicles. But it is an issue for us that on Florida, that is, that we constantly someone have to come or leave a car parked there and move it every 24 hours, 48 hours. So, but if that is not guaranteed for us to basically for my parking space to be in front of my house, I don't think it will work for us. But I really thank you for that study. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karen again, and thank you for all the, anyways. What I'm concerned is there is on our street lives one person in the house, has two cars, and he puts his cars right in the middle, so he has a little bit room on this side and a little bit room on this side, not even in front of his driveway or uses his driveway. So, and it's always limited parking, and when somebody parks in front of him, is this much in his driveway, even though he doesn't use it, he calls the cops on the people. And I have another one down on the other side. It's somebody, it's just visiting and taking up, I mean, not just for a day, for a week, for months. He has his car parked over there and taking up spaces from other people because they live on Crystal Spring. They have a driveway, but there are also people have more than one vehicle. They park on our street, and people just unconsiderate and taking spaces away from other tenants or other people who live there. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan Mercenary, Keynes Avenue. I'd like to say thank you very much to the committee for looking into this matter. I appreciate very much your hard work. I was wondering if we could also add into the mixture of looking at things. Certain streets in our city are very narrow, and I would suggest that making them one-way would not only improve parking, because most studies have shown that one-way streets and narrow streets, parking is improved being one way, but also it makes it easier for emergency vehicles to get up and down. Many of our very narrow streets, if you drive up and down them, are already treated by the residents as one-way streets now. They all park in, one direction depending upon the side of the block. And I think that that would be a helpful mix, a helpful solution in certain parts of our city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. I'd like to thank everyone on the committee. Tom, you did a great job of going through the deck. And I was there in February. There was more dialogue and more added to the deck, not the deck, but in your dialogue. It's good to hear that many of you kind of disagreed with one another, because this is a topic that isn't easy, and that's why we're here today. But I do want to remind everyone that it was late 2016 that I asked, and before me, I'm sure many before me, asked for something to be done about the parking. So whatever it is that we do, I'd like to see it done before 2020. That's the only thing I'm going to ask, all right? A little facetious there. But I think it's hard to talk about the permit and the number of permits when on our streets there is so much noise to begin with. We have an issue with oversized vehicles. We have an issue with trailers unattached just parking on the street. We have an issue down in the Bel Air area with the commercial use of our streets by the auto repair shops. That's also true over off of Herman and in the 5th Edition. We have an issue with cars that just park and stay for 2 weeks so they can go to the airport.
or to the train. And when we talk about the enforcement piece, I feel like if the city had a plan, we have an issue with the in-ops that sit in driveways. I feel like if and our city codes restrict in-ops from sitting in driveways. And they restrict the other things that I just mentioned too. I feel like that if we addressed the enforcement piece, that we would open up more parking. And then some of the neighborhoods that are concerned that are the reason why we're talking about parking permit programs, the solution may already be done. There may not need to be a parking permit. So I'd like to see more work looked at into this area, into the enforcement and getting the vehicles that our laws and ordinances already restrict from being on our public streets. I have a couple of questions. When you talk about an RPP in a neighborhood, what does a neighborhood, I mean, what is a neighborhood? Is it one street? Is it 4 streets? Or is that not yet defined?
Continue with your questions and we'll get them.
Oh, okay, okay,
if
thank you.
that's all right.
The next question is, in the city studied, did they also require the residents to conduct their own petition? Or did some of the cities just look at the impacted areas and say, we've got to step up and do something because the quality of life is suffering and it's lowering the property values, and let's take some steps and not wait for someone to put all of the sweat into doing the petition? So that's another question. The next question is, okay, those are the 2 questions. And then I really would like some dialogue or someone to talk to me about the enforcement piece of those other vehicles. I feel like if you take 4 cars off my street that shouldn't be there, it's gonna make a big difference on Mastic Avenue. If you do that on many other streets, I think it'll make a big difference too. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else this evening that'd like to speak on this matter? If not, why don't we bring it back to City Council for comments? Marty?
I'd like to hear from those council members that haven't done.
Okay. Would you like to add anything from the subcommittee? Because I know there's some questions that I think the public...
No, but we can answer the questions. We can answer the questions, but go for it.
I'm happy to answer the questions. Should we go back through?
Well, we'll okay. So, Marty, as a subcommittee member, did you want to add anything at this time?
No, not at this time,
Okay,
Mayor.
that's
I'm
what I was
good.
looking for. I was trying to give the courtesy. Okay, so no worries. So Tom, and if I can, we'll try to go through you, or we'll go through staff if that's okay. We did hear that there was the curb cut was a potential very good thing. We also talked about visitor parking, which came up, and that was in regards to having more than just one guest, because if you're going to have a barbecue, you got to have several people, right? Okay, let's be honest. So on the visitor parking, Tom, maybe you can enlighten the folks here of what kind of went down that path a little.
Yeah. So this is it's a difficult thing to consider. We looked at San Francisco a lot because obviously they have a quite extensive and permit parking program. Whoa, this moves in their neighborhoods, and and they don't have as much of an issue with the need for visitor parking because throughout the city, their ordinances are 2-hour parking unless you have a permit. The problem with that in a city of our size is the enforcement. In order to be able to have that level of that particular model, you need to have an army of I don't want to say meter maids, but you know what I mean, going through the neighborhood and chalking tires and then coming back and chalking them again after 2 hours. And it's not, we spoke with the police chief and staff. It's not feasible for a city of our size. It's cost prohibitive. So then that puts us into it's permits required during certain times. This is going to go toward one of the other questions on the list there, but As far as when parking permits would be enforced would vary by neighborhood based on the needs of that neighborhood. In some neighborhoods, the problem happens during the weekdays because it's like, we'll use the 5th edition as an example that Mr. Seymour brought up, where they're getting it from two sides. They're getting people who leave their car in the neighborhood and go ride BART because they're too cheap to buy a parking space. So there's an outside parking generator coming from the west. Coming from the east, they have all of the auto repair shops that every morning open up their gates, dump all the cars they're working on into the neighborhood, but at the end of the workday, all the people come back off of BART and go home. All those cars, all the repair cars, go back into the lot, and at night maybe not so much of a problem. So in a neighborhood like that, if you're going to have a party, you're probably not going to have a party, 10 a.m. on a Wednesday. So it's probably, so in neighborhoods like that, maybe not so much of an issue. So it's all going to depend on what the particular issue is in your neighborhood. So I don't know if that completely addresses the question, but the thing about visitors permits, it's really difficult because how many do we give out? How do you get them? How do you prevent somebody from getting a visitor permit and then selling it to somebody who's going to leave their car and go to the airport? There's all kinds of considerations that come into play.
Thank you. Then there was another about counting the driveway parking as also available parking within the inventory.
So we actually did bring that up, and staff found that to be not feasible. Since we are regulating street parking, the inventory needs to count only street spaces. I don't know if Jamie, if you want to elaborate more on that, but that was the guidance we received from staff.
We've heard from a few as far as there are situations on their streets and the neighbors around them. Also was brought up about consideration for the narrow streets on the one-way usage to try to help increase emergency vehicles as well as accommodate the narrow street.
Yeah, that is not something that we discussed during our deliberations. That is something that I've heard occasionally as I've been on the TSPC. It's certainly something that I think can be investigated in some neighborhoods. I would recommend that the city look at that for some streets where it would make sense.
Then it came into the definition of a neighborhood. So yes. How is that defined in one part of it? The second part was, in the research, was there other cities that went ahead and determined that there was a concern, and then I'll use Mark Howard's word, imposed.
Exactly.
That was the word he used continuously during the subcommittee meetings. Imposed the parking permit program. I'll do that for Mark since he's not here. No, that was Mark's word that he wouldn't let us forget.
So to address the question of what is a neighborhood, that's going to vary. So step one here, when the process begins, the resident would work with Public Works to put together the proposed permit area boundaries. So you might have a permit area that is just a few blocks. You might have a permit area that's quite large. We deliberately made the program vague in this area so that it can be flexible. We don't want to, if we said, a parking permit area must have at least 500 homes in it, and then then we have an impacted area that only has 300 homes, and so they can never participate. We didn't want to have any type of hard and fast rules for what is a neighborhood. There are logical boundaries, and there are, major streets, that sort of thing. Physical, geographical boundaries, things like that, and there are legal boundaries. There are things like, as I mentioned during my presentation about not ending it in the middle of a block where people would not understand why you need a permit for that spot, but not this one that's adjacent to it. So that's why we deliberately left it vague.
And then two speakers were in regards to enforcement, which I know is kind of outside of our realm, but also about the trailers, oversized vehicles, commercial use of vehicles on the streets, also parking for 2 weeks, the non-ops in the driveways, as well as those in the commercial area where the repair dealers or shops are. So those were a culmination of things. Some of that is maybe on the enforcement element. I didn't know if there was anything you want to touch.
No, I mean, much of that is incorporated into our additional recommendations that we have. I want to reiterate that we don't want these to be tied together with the discussion of a parking permit program, that these are things that we would like the city to investigate in the very short term and implement as soon as possible if they so choose.
Thank you, Tom. And I think I got through the questions that I had written down from the folks. Did I miss one? Good, because I was taking notes. Okay. Mike, Stephen. But we'll give you this one time because maybe I overlooked something. So go ahead. If you go to the mic, Stephen, please.
Actually, all I was really wanted to ask was, is public comment still, I mean, are we still allowed to ask more questions? Because when you go through these things, it generates other questions.
So what I would like to do at this point is have the council, because none of the council has had an opportunity.
Okay.
So I wanted to, first and foremost, it was asked to have the public able to speak in case you do have to get home. I wanted to make sure the public received their answers to their questions in case you had to get home or had something else. So I'd like to bring it back to the council, see if staff has any comment. And I do want to say that also, as we look upon this, and staff can correct me, you know, it's about cost, there is about enforcement, so it's not bringing forward to you what will that cost, what will that enforcement cost. So this is kind of the initial stage of giving back what the subcommittee has discussed and dealt with. So Tom, I appreciate you standing there and answering those questions, and thank you again. You did a lot of work. Marty, did you have anything now, or?
I can go now. So I think Tom summarized it. How do we make it better? Because the way it is now is horrible. At our home, we have 2 cars. I removed a fence and moved it back to be able to fit 2 cars in my driveway. And then we play the San Bruno Shuffle when we get home. If I get home first, I try to park on the street, and if I don't, then I try to park around the other street so that Mom and my son could get the more secure parking space in the driveway, right? So doing nothing is just going to remain the same. It's going to be terrible. We're just going to continue, and we, because I live in an impacted neighborhood, it's just going to likely get worse. So there is no clear solution. There is no guarantee that you're ever going to have a parking space, because you're not guaranteed a parking space now. And if you're guaranteed a parking space because somebody wrote that on Nextdoor, then you don't need a parking permit program. I mean, you're good. If you can park in front of your house, God bless you. You know, you're lucky. We didn't talk about the cost because, for that very fact, my point was, how am I going to try to charge you for a permit if you don't get a guarantee you can park in front of your house? So it falls back again to, do you want to make it better in your neighborhood? Then we're going to have to figure something out a little bit, right? I disagreed with staff on issuing more than 2 permits per household, because, like, if we had one more person in our home, we could park somebody on the driveway, and we could fit 2 people on the driveway, and then we would have 1 permitted space out, or I'm sorry, we'd have 1 permit to park on the street. But that's not always going to work out. It gives you flexibility that, hey, and people are creative. You're going to figure it out. Who gets home, gets the permit. If you have different hours, then you don't need a permit for your car, because you're always going to be able to get into the driveway, or the permitted cars will always take up that space. I think it's really, really important that I'm hoping that our council moves forward with these two paths of the solution. The parking permit program, and then ways that we can improve our inventory, the unattached trailers, and then the combined trailer and vehicle that's, I don't know, close to 30-something feet, if not bigger, how we can keep those from being in the impacted neighborhoods for any length of time, right? And we all seen people in different parts of town where they come up, park their car, pull out a suitcase out of the trunk, and here comes an Uber driver, and they go to the airport. So that would be totally eliminated with the parking program, with the permit. The visitor permit could be abused, and if I was having a barbecue, and I remember as I used to go to the city, you would carpool, right? And the person that had the barbecue would park on the street to let their guests park inside. And taking public transit's a good thing. So, and we have it fortunately nearby, right? So, those are kind of my thoughts. I think they should be free. I'm more in favor of having a limit of the number of parking permits based on how many residents have their cars registered to that home. So if there was three people living in a house, or your house was 4, then maybe the limit would be 4, because families are kind of staying together longer because it's really expensive here. So your kid may go to college and come back and live at home for a while. So 3 cars, 3 people, you know, you're not going to give one of them a permit, but we can try to work through that and figure out how something is better than doing nothing.
Other comments from council members? Laura.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all. I mean, we've heard it, but again, thank you for the excellent presentation and for the subcommittee who put a lot of effort on this program. So I agree with Marty in the sense that there are really 2 paths that we need to go down. One of them is to be able to provide a tool to the residents to, if they have struggled enough, and they know who they are, and they know what their challenges are, to work on a permit program. And I think what you've outlined has been excellent. It allows flexibility, it allows changes. You laid out some great examples where in certain areas it's not an issue during the day, maybe to park, but it might be an issue at night, or it might be an issue during the day to park. And so the flexibility with the permit process. I agree there's going to definitely be some challenges with guest parking depending on what your challenges are, but that's going to be up to the permit process and the group applying for that permit process. A couple of questions I have in response to getting the 51% to who gets to vote on that? Is it, I have a home with, you know, really only 2 registered voters or 2 people live in this home, but I got 20 people live in this house, because I know that exists too. They're renting out garages, or renting out basements, or renting out every square footage of a house. So how many votes do you get in a home? Is it just 1 vote per resident? What if they don't respond, right? Because you're going to get that. You're going to get people who don't like, I want part of this. I probably don't even live in this country, and I've got a home that stays vacant. I know there are a ton of residents out there that have that issue too. So I think these are all little things. I'm not asking for answers tonight that'll have to get addressed to figure out how we get to that part of making it fair, making it doable. I agree also with the 2 permits per household. I think if you don't have the parking spaces, you can't give out the permits. So I think that's a great point that was made. I think probably the most important conversation we can have is, so the permit is one avenue and one direction we're going to go to try to improve parking in those areas. And let's back up a second. There's so many areas of San Bruno that have parking issues. Up near Skyline College, up off of Susan Drive, huge parking issues. The overflow up near Shelter Creek. One of the meetings you had, you probably had more residents in this room from the neighborhood near Shelter Creek than you did from any other part of San Bruno. On my street, we dodge parking places all day long, all the time. So it is becoming an abundance of a problem. The Uber, dropping off their car, don't even live in the neighborhood, and picking up an Uber to go to the airport. So we know it and we exist. We got to be able to give them the tools. So the one avenue is permits, and I think we need to figure out better ways to manage parking issues in San Bruno. And I don't know that we have all the answers, but there's some simple things that I've heard, and that is, vehicles that are oversized, vehicles with trailers. Back in the day when we did have an abundance, not an abundance, but we had revenues that can support the amount of police staff, and we had meter maids. And literally in downtown San Bruno, you didn't park your car for more than 2 hours because you were going to get a ticket. It was a known thing. And you saw people actually running out to get to their car because you were going to get a ticket. I don't know if that's the case anymore. We were talking to somebody on San Mateo Avenue over the weekend who says, yeah, I kind of roll my car back a little bit. And then, I don't know that the enforcement is there. And it comes down to we don't have the staff because we can't afford it. It's expensive. Police and fire are a big expense to us. And adding more police isn't necessarily the solution because we can't afford it. So how do we address the other issues with really addressing the issues that are really blatant? If you're a resident and there is somebody who's parked in front of your house for 2 weeks, for 3 days, you can call and report it, and they will come out and mark it, and that vehicle can get towed. Can we address the inoperable vehicles? I think that's another thing we can address. So I think that it's really looking at the top items that we want to address and the most feasible and doable, and then figuring out how we can continue to better improve parking availability in San Bruno.
Thank you. Just wanted to commend the joint subcommittee. Like Laura mentioned, a few of us sat in on one of the last meetings you had, and we saw how passionate some of the people were in that meeting. So I know it hasn't been easy, but you guys did an amazing job of really consolidating all of the issues and coming up with some things to focus on. And I agree with Laura and with Marty that we do need to start looking at some of those things sooner rather than later. I'm still a little, doubtful that permits are really going to be a solution, especially if you issue too many of them. But looking at some of these other things, including enforcement, we definitely have to start looking at those. I'm wondering if the permit program could be used as a source of revenue to kind of help with the enforcement of all the other issues. Then maybe a combination of those things could really help out. But I just wanted to thank you again for the work that you guys did on that. Somebody mentioned looking at one-way streets, and I know that's not directly related to parking, but since you're up there, Tom, I was just wondering, in your history on the committee, have one-way streets ever been looked at in any of the neighborhoods as solutions to either congestion and/or parking?
Not officially. There haven't been any streets that have been proposed for conversion to one-way on my 12 years on the committee. But that doesn't mean that we can't.
Okay.
On our committee, we can ask staff to look at things, but mostly we're acting on things that staff brings to us. But if there are specific streets in the city that would benefit from being one way, that's certainly something that I would recommend that the city look at. There's always concerns if you make this street one way, then do you make the next street going one way in the other direction? How do you make sure that you're not pushing traffic onto your neighboring streets? All those types of things. But
right.
But that's stuff that staff can look at.
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated issue. But I've heard that suggestion from a few different residents, and I know, especially like on garbage day, when you get stuck behind a garbage truck, and then you got cars coming in both directions, and nobody knows how to get out of it. So there are a lot of streets that could benefit from that.
Anything else?
No, that was it. Thank you.
Maureen, did you have any comments or?
Please. I would be remiss if I didn't also thank you for all your work and everyone else and staff. I have a couple of concerns. I hate to be a dampening force here, but everything on the chart and everything that almost everything has to do with staffing. Staff does this, staff does that, staff does that. And our staff right now, unless I'm mistaken, are up to the eyeballs in everything. So I would hate to put a stamp of approval on something and then not have the staff to back it up. So that's a concern. And also enforcement. It is very frustrating. You drive around someplace and you see the boat trailer, or you see the oversized whatever it is, and you know that there's just staff has not been able to get there and mark it, or if they mark it, they haven't been able to get around and re-mark it to put a ticket on it, or if they have put a ticket on it, the person ignores it and throws the ticket away. So there's all those kinds of things that are out there. I've been in many cities where they have parking permits and have parked and never saw anybody and have parked my car there for 6 or 8 hours and never gotten any repercussions from it. So I would hate our resident, and I wasn't blocking anyone, but I would hate our residents to have the expectations that because I have a parking permit, I'm going to have, it's going to solve everything. And I'm also concerned about the 2 per resident. I have 4 adults in my house. We have 4 cars. I'm only going to get two parking permits if we do that. That's a hard one. And visitor parking, I'm sorry, my husband's family, we get 14 to 16 people in cars coming to parties every few months because that's how many people are in the neighborhood, that are in the family. So there's a lot to look at. I think maybe we could start with some of the things that were discussed about increasing the parking inventory to start with, getting the oversized vehicles that aren't supposed to be there off the streets. I'm not sure if we need more staff to do that, if we need to contract out for a short amount of time, if we need to. And maybe another thing we could do, parking tickets in San Francisco are $72. Over here, they're only $32, $38. And maybe we make it more painful to park where you're not, or to not park there. But people should also understand, some people think that that's a revenue generator. Yes, the city gets some money, but we don't get the whole amount either. So, our eyes can't get too big about that. Anyway, those are some of my concerns. And again, I do thank you for all the work you did.
You're welcome. Can I make a quick?
Yeah, please, Tom.
Just to echo Councilmember O'Connell's point there regarding the current fines for parking. Currently, using the example that Councilmember Benina mentioned of folks who come and park in the neighborhoods and then head to the airport, you can do that. You're rolling the dice as to whether you're going to get a ticket, but even if you get a ticket, it's still cheaper than parking at the airport. So you can't lose. So it's that I'm speaking not as a subcommittee member, but as a resident. I think that's ridiculous, and I do think that we should look at our fee structure and our fines for parking violations and really look at them hard and put them up.
And then I don't know, City Manager, if you have any comments or thoughts you want to offer, and maybe into the fine, since we ended on that note, the logistics of that, doing that or proposing that.
I'm sorry, I can't offer any comments directly on the issue of fines, but that's something that we can look into. It sounds like there's interesting, good reasons to consider doing that. I don't have information about the legal aspects of our ability to do that. Just on the permit parking program itself, again, appreciation to you, Tom, in particular, for the great deal of work that went into producing a PowerPoint and presentation that makes sense and is a very faithful representation, I think, of the many, many, many hours of discussion that were undertaken by the subcommittee. And I would especially appreciate the comments that you included in your presentation representing some areas of staff's opinion and our participation in some, but not all, of the subcommittee meetings. From staff's perspective, there remain a fair number of kind of difficult issues that need to be addressed and resolved in order for us to be able to represent to you that we have a program that we can readily implement and enforce. So with that consideration, staff will take, if it is the City Council's pleasure, Staff is prepared to undertake some additional work to review and consider the various aspects of the program and to return to you at a later time with some of our comments and suggestions with respect to the program. If it's the City Council's, and I would add one more interest that staff obviously will be looking carefully at is the staffing components and cost components that would be necessary to implement a program of this nature and this scope. Secondly, with regard to the variety of strategies or potential strategies to increase the availability of parking, similarly with if it is staff's pleasure, staff is prepared to look into those items. We have not had the opportunity to conduct any thoughtful review of most of those issues, and we need some time to render some analysis and some recommendations back to the City Council about what and how to further consider some of those items.
And I do know that through our subcommittee process, even from the police department perspective, they were trying to look at it globally and say logistically, if you've got these streets that are only at this time on these days and then these streets are not, currently if it's street sweeping, it's on one side of the street between 9 and 11, it's consistent and it flows. Or if it's the parking behind San Mateo Avenue and it's 5 hours, then it's a flow. When you start dividing it up, that becomes more logistics as far as meeting that expectation. There was also thought on the revenue perspective as, let's say it begins, and then you get those people that get tickets. They live, they learn, they don't park. And that's great, but then that revenue is not there. So you really can't count on the revenue as an ongoing source. It just doesn't work. Just on the street sweeping. You get it once or twice, you probably are looking at the sign when it's Monday or Tuesday on my block. So I just wanted that there was some legitimate concerns on staff in regards to the staffing element and making it fluid so that it flows and it's not chopped up, because that becomes a challenge for enforcement. And obviously if it's not enforced, then what's the point of the investment and the time and the expectations of the residents? So it has to be something that works on all ends. What I've heard from the city manager is on, I'll use the word parking inventory. I guess that's the right one to use. The fines potentially that we were just discussing, if there can be more, I don't want to use, well, I guess I'll use Irene's pain in those, but I do know that they're costly across the board in other jurisdictions as well. I think those were some of the immediate things with budget coming up. Was there other things from council too that we would like? I know there's other elements to this that I discussed tonight that I heard from the public, from non-operational vehicles and other aspects of that. I think that's something that staff could come back and just say, let's define it. What does it mean? What is required? Is it or is it not a violation? Whether there's a photo. And so anybody can tell this is something we should call in or not call in. Because I think what I also hear sometimes from the community is confusion. Yes, if they have a non-operational from the DMV for $50, can I park it on the driveway? Yes or no? Or does it have to be enclosed to where it can't be seen? And I think even at that time, because what I don't want to see is staff being called out to items that are legal or within the California DMV, which isn't with us, it's from a higher authority per se. So I think it would also be helpful for our educational and communication aspect so that we know. But the inventory, I think, is a good point, and then to define some of those topics on the overweight or whether it's the trailers, what can be done or can't be done. Any other thoughts from council?
So just so we're clear, it sounds like there's a consensus. I know that Irene's not in favor. Maybe you are interested in getting more information on a permit, or no?
I, as people often say, I'd like to get the low-hanging fruit first,
yes.
So that we don't go through all the effort and then people realize they really don't need the permits because we've taken care of the other things.
Right.
So if staff can come back with some recommendations about increasing parking ticket fees, however they do it, about vehicles that, inventory, the vehicles are too long or they're over whatever, shouldn't be parked where it is parked that can be removed or towed or whatever. Just as Rico said, we need some general education about what's possible, what's not possible, and some definitive answers that we can all go from there.
So the other thing too is, when we learned through our history, is that there is a municipal code and there is a parking permit program already existing, and it's near the old train station. So, and I think we heard there was 12 or 15 folks that had taken permits back then because, as you know, where the train station was right there in the midst of the residential area. So there is something on the books for that. It doesn't assist in any of the other areas of the community, to my understanding and knowledge. But that was just food for thought. So I think, as Irene said, it's the inventory, the fines, the in-op, and other overweight or trailer type things for that information. I'm trying to be mindful too of what staff can accomplish with the budget coming up. So I want to make sure we can proceed with something and not just put too much that's not going to come back and then we disappoint. Any other thoughts from council?
Well, I want to definitely proceed with the process of permits. I don't want to, I know we can, one thing at a time, so let's address the more near issues that we can address those going forward, and then know that the permit process is not off the table, and that we'll continue that discussion once we get through more of a
No one's saying anything's off
priority.
the government, just trying to,
Yeah.
like our other presentation.
Yeah.
What can we do in the near?
Yep,
What can
yep.
we do in the far?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, because the other thing too is that
but there's going to need more discussion too, because there's not a consensus on how many permits. There's not a consensus whether it's free or not. So I think that's where I'll use somebody else's. The rubber meets the road, Jim. About how are we going to do it? How is it going to get done? What are the true costs going to be? We were given some initial costs, and it was like, wow. So we're up in budget time, so that's also, I think, a good opportunity to see what will it take and what will it cost and how do we get it done.
Okay. So you're saying, well, we'll address the first issues and then revisit the permit cost and process? Because I guess there's a lot more information that you have as a subcommittee that wasn't shared. Is that my understanding?
I wouldn't say it's a lot more. I don't know, Mr. Medina, what would you? I wouldn't say that.
We talked about a lot of things that the costs and
yeah, we had
weren't
some
gonna be
we had some
agreed.
tables of potential fee structures and we also have the complete ordinances in use in South City, in Millbrae, in San Mateo that we used as a guide as well. So and staff has all of that information. Everything that we've generated is in staff's possession.
Good.
Okay.
I did realize that we missed one of Mr. Seymour's questions about whether other cities went to surveyed the residents before putting in a parking permit program, and the answer is no. They said this is an issue, so now you've got a permit a program in your neighborhood. No one on our subcommittee liked that idea because of we did not want to come down into a neighborhood and put in a program that the residents don't want. And our position was to make sure that that we're doing this work and implementing these potential fixes because the residents want them. And the other point is regarding doing the surveys and stuff. The city would be doing the surveys. It wouldn't be making the residents go and knock on strangers' doors and all that kind of stuff. The city would do it, but that's why we want to make sure, because of the cost of doing all of that, that's why we want to make sure at every step of the way that there is interest from within the neighborhoods. So I apologize for not addressing those questions earlier.
Thank you for circling back around on that. And again, thank you again, Tom. Appreciate it. Okay, and then City Manager, if when you and staff are able to meet, if you can, on the few items that we discussed in regards to the fines, the parking inventory, and what was the third thing I had said? The INOP and the oversize, if there could be maybe when the staff meets again, it's just a timeline, meaning a month, 2 months, just so we have a suggestion on those few items.
So the few items are the fines, and you're looking for an informational report
Yeah.
on fines, oversized vehicles, and what was the third one?
Parking inventory. In ops, yeah. So it's up in the
on all of
PowerPoint.
those items. All of the items is a fairly significant work effort. I mean, looking at the various changes to driveway widths and all of that is probably a little bit more time-consuming and complicated. Fines and what was the second item?
In-ops,
fines and oversized vehicles.
trailers, oversized.
Yeah, inoperable vehicles is a little bit of is a little bit more challenging. Oversized vehicles is probably relatively a straightforward item.
And trailers. Okay, I
So
appreciate you.
I would imagine that we could be back to you with those two items relatively quickly. We are hip deep into the budget preparation process right now. It's possible we could get back to you during the month of June. It would be preferable if we could have until July.
Okay.
Perfect.
Other comments, questions, Council? Tom, thank you again. Appreciate it very much. Yes, Marty.
Are we disbanded?
The
subcommittee?
Never been asked that point.
Are we released from our duty? Because
I think I would. Tom wants to be.
I think
no. I would say at this point we are until further notice,
Okay.
or another one is formed. Yes, thank you for asking, Marty. Appreciate it. Vicki?
Item 9B, receive third quarter financial update report as of March 31st, 2018, and adopt resolution approving third quarter budget amendment for the 2017-18 operating and capital budget.
Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, thank you for the opportunity to review the third quarter financial update report as of March 31st. The third quarter report does provide a solid trend for revenue and expenditures for the current fiscal year. And this report is important because simultaneously we are working, as the city manager indicated, on the 18-19 budget and determining a year-end estimate for 17-18 is a significant part of that budget process. I said that it is a solid trend. I would point out that as it relates to property tax, we still have only received 1/2 of the property tax reflected in this report. There is the April payment that we have received but is not reflected in the report. Things as the significant franchise fee that the city receives from PG&E is not received or has been received in April, so again is not reflected in the report, and they are some relatively big numbers. So while this report is significant, there are outstanding items that lead to not knowing the exact outcomes. So the brief summary shows that general fund revenues, and I'll show general fund expenditures in a second here, are matching very close to what one would expect 9 months into the budget, and can project for most of them theoretically close to the 75% of the year, depending on the actual cash flow of the revenues. So total general fund revenues are projected to equal a little over $43 million, and expenditures are projected to be at $45.6 million. Just wanted to reiterate the point, while we're looking at the revenues and expenditures individually here, the budget as approved by the council did have a gap between revenues and expenditures of about $1.2 million. It is a requirement that the city council adopt a balanced budget, and the 17-18 budget, despite this gap between revenues and expenditures, was balanced by the use of one-time monies, an appropriate measure in balancing a budget. The one-time revenues essentially came from under expenditures that occurred in the prior year. I reviewed the city revenues in some detail at the City Council's April 30th study session, so I will not go into great detail tonight. Would just, in very quick summary, would say that would expect that the revenues will come in at the end of the year very close to the budget. Property tax, I would expect to be very slightly up from budget. Sales tax would expect to be somewhat down. I think, again, we had a discussion about sales tax last week. I think just one point of note is if you look over the last 4 quarters, the last 2 years, there's been about an 8% reduction in sales tax revenue. So we did discuss sales tax, and I think while for 17-18 it'll be down somewhat, a relatively small number, it is still an area of some concern. It's not clearly shown here, but I just wanted to point out that general fund revenues, departmental revenues are up, and this is included in the staff report, are up about $362,000 compared to 16-17, and higher revenues include police parking fines, building permit, and community development plan check revenues. Looking at the expenditure side, you see that the expenditures are about 70% in the current year compared to 70% last year. I would point out that the budget is up compared to 16-17, so it is 70% of a little higher number. I think the only other comment that might stand out to the council is if, in looking at the internal service funds, you see that expenditures in the self-insurance fund are significantly higher than the budget, and there's a couple of items. The general liability premium paid to ABAG was substantially higher than the budget. Claim costs in the workers' comp area are running higher than the budget, but the main reason for the increase is about $500,000 in costs associated with the truck collision here at the senior center are being charged to the self-insurance fund, and would expect all of the costs that are shown in this fund will be reimbursed through the third-party insurance. Also included in the staff report, with the staff report, is a resolution related to or for a budget amendment There are really 5 changes to the budget in the third quarter. 2 of them are related to salary and benefit increases, either through approved MOU changes or employment contract. These items were previously approved in March by the City Council. There are also additional appropriations for the Bel Air parking lot improvement, street light pole replacement, and downtown parking lot resurfacing for capital projects. Each of those capital projects, each of those previously approved by the council in either February or March of 2018. With those brief comments, I'd be glad to answer any questions the council has.
Questions of Mr. O'Leary?
I think first of all, I think I'll make a comment. So thank you for your report, Jim O'Leary. I just wanted to say that there's, one of the things from the study session, and for those who weren't at the study session either, is that, we're not seeing the increase in sales tax. If you look at the numbers, and you provided this report over the last 5 years, it's pretty flat. In fact, currently we're at like 3% less than we expected to be at this time of year. So, sales tax is a big hit that we're going to continue to see with online sales, et cetera. And as you mentioned in your report as well, that the increase in PERS. So there's some additional things that, I guess the question is, at this point, here's your third quarter, what are some changes we can make going forward to actually not be in a deficit at the end of the year? And what are some recommendations?
That was to you.
Well, again, the City Council approved a balanced budget, and I'm projecting with the revenues and the expenditures as approved and as we're projecting for the year end, I think the revenues are going to be very close to the budgeted revenues. It's not clear really from just looking at the data, because some of the revenues, as I indicated, some big ones don't come in until April, so you don't see it. But I mentioned simultaneously we are preparing the 18-19 budget, and the very preliminary numbers, when we're looking at the estimate for 17-18, shows significant, and by significant I'm talking about $1 million, in expenditures being controlled less than the budget. So I think if your question was, does the City Council need to take actions today in order to end up in a balanced budget, my message to you is the budget will continue to be balanced based on the council approval. At the end of the year, June 30th, it will in fact meet that, and it will be balanced. So if there's a desire to take further action, that's for the council to decide, but at a necessity, there is not a necessity to balance the budget. It is going to be balanced.
Thank you.
It's going to remain balanced.
Any questions? Is there any action from council?
I'll introduce the resolution approving the budget amendments.
Councilmember Salazar?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Davis?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye.
Item 9C, receive oral update on the city's appeal of the Federal Emergency Management Agency San Francisco Bay Coastal Study for the City of San Bruno.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. The purpose of tonight's report is to provide a status update to the City Council and the community regarding the FEMA flood maps. So just a little background on this topic first. This FEMA item in front of you tonight has been brought to the City Council several times for a status update and award of consultants' contracts. The very last time we're here to discuss the issue was in December 2016, where staff presented and provided the timeline and status of the various events that took place since we were informed of the flood map changes by FEMA back in November 2014. Staff has been heavily engaged in this entire process for more than 3 years now, trying our best to do what we could for our residents. As you may recall, FEMA's preliminary flood maps showed that majority of the residential properties in the Bel Air neighborhood will be newly mapped into the FEMA updated coastal flood maps. So here's a map of the preliminary maps, and the area inside the red oval will be mapped into the new FEMA maps. So what did the city do? We hired a consultant to help us perform a technical analysis and determine the flooding sources to this area, and also perform detailed hydraulic analysis to compare it to FEMA's results. Our detailed analysis results indicated less flood inundation areas than FEMA's maps. So here's a comparison between ours, which is on the right, and then what FEMA's is shown on the left. The city then submitted an appeal to FEMA to consider our analysis. FEMA denied our appeal, but the city was given another opportunity to present our issue to the scientific review panel, which consists of 5 members from the National Institute of Buildings and Sciences, or NIBS. We recently received a resolution for this issue, which was unfortunately not in the city's favor. So why is this issue so important for the city to continue the engagement with FEMA until the very end? Well, it's important because many of our residents in the Bel Air neighborhood will be financially impacted by being mapped into the new FEMA flood maps, because they'll be required to purchase flood insurance for their properties. We believe that as the city, we should do everything we can for our residents so that they receive full support from our city to see this issue until the end. Unlike other cities in the peninsula, our city, with the city council support, has gone above and beyond to represent the residents in our community in regards to this FEMA issue. This issue is something that we could have elected to accept, like other agencies in San Mateo County, but we did not. Having to go against or prove to a federal agency such as FEMA that their analysis and methodologies are incorrect is not an easy task. However, we believe that our residents in the Bel Air neighborhood should not be mapped into the new flood maps, because they will never be subjected to coastal flooding at all, as there are existing flood walls around the San Francisco airport and the tide gate structures at the end of the San Bruno Channel that will prevent the water from coming towards our city and reaching the properties. Although those flood walls and tide gate structures exist, FEMA does not take them into account in their model, because FEMA considered them non-accredited structures and removed them in their model. Our city also does not have any coastal properties like Burlingame or San Mateo, and our city is set back far away from the bay. Therefore, we closely coordinated with our consultant to perform detailed model using FEMA's model information, and chose to submit the appeal package to FEMA. Staff coordinated with both Supervisors David Pine's office and Congresswoman Jackie Spear's office as well, and they provided letters of support on behalf of our appeal. Once our appeal was denied, the city continued and submitted the application to FEMA right away, requesting the Scientific Resolution Panel, or SRP, to review our methodology, which is the last step in the appeal process. The SRP consists of independent panels of experts in hydrology and hydraulics to assist in the review of conflicting scientific and technical data and providing the resolution. So once the application was submitted, staff also reviewed the results of the SRP resolutions on the web and noticed that all the results were in favor of FEMA. We knew the cards were stacked against us, but we still decided to pursue the SRP process because we believed our analysis produced more accurate surface flooding areas results than FEMA. FEMA's analysis didn't consider duration of the tide level and simply applied a static base flood elevation. The elevation that FEMA derived in the analysis for San Bruno was 10.4 feet. Therefore, any properties within the 10.4 feet or below is considered to be flooded in FEMA's model. FEMA assumed an infinite amount of water coming in, but nothing is going back out. And our analysis our consultant performed took into account the tidal duration and terrain changes. So on February 8th of this year, FEMA scheduled the city to provide the presentation of our methodology to the SRP panel, which consisted of the 5 members, as I mentioned, from the NIBS. And our city, along with City of San Francisco, which was the only other agency that submitted the appeal and requested SRP, presented our information to both FEMA and NIBS panel members. FEMA also had an opportunity to present their information during the meeting. So on April 30th, both cities received a report of NIBS findings denying the appeal. NIBS panel determined that the appeal did not conclusively support or identify presence of scientific errors in FEMA's preliminary flood hazard study, therefore denying both agencies' appeal. They also stated that the data submitted by the city in the appeal package did not provide more accurate estimates of the flood hazards in the Bay Area neighborhood. So according to NIBS, the remaining options for the city are to accept NIBS findings or result in a legal battle with FEMA. Staff believes that the city has pursued every available options and recommends the City Council not to pursue this issue any further. Staff will begin reaching out to FEMA and request them to be present at a community meeting, which they have been reluctant to do because the flood maps were not finalized. The main conversation will be timeline and procedures to obtain flood insurance. Once the date is determined for the meeting, staff will send notifications to the residents who are affected and request their attendance. Residents who are newly mapped into the flood zone is recommended to purchase flood insurance before the maps become effective so they will save some costs on the flood insurance premiums. As for FEMA's schedule and finalizing the flood maps, FEMA was originally anticipating to issue the letter of final map determination in March of 2017. So with our appeal and SRP process, the finalization of these San Mateo County flood maps have been delayed for more than a year. And FEMA anticipates issuing the letter of final map determination in September of this year. And once FEMA issues that letter, there will be a 6-month period before the maps become effective. So in closing, I would like to thank the City Council, City Manager Brian Perkins, and Michael Barber from the Supervisor David Pine's office, and mentioned by Brian Perkins from the Congresswoman Jackie Spear office for all your support on this issue. Brian and Michael have been supporting the city since the beginning by attending meetings and conference calls to discuss the issues, and we are very grateful to have them on our side throughout this entire process. And Brian is here today, and he has some preliminary issues about insurance requirement and cost that he can share with us tonight as well. This concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Mr. Perkins.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My name is Brian Perkins. I'm the district director for Congresswoman Jackie Spear. Tonight I'm also here with our deputy district director, Katrina Reel. This was a disappointment, and the Congresswoman was also very disappointed in the determination. We thought that the city had a solid case on a scientific basis for not being determined to be in a flood zone in the Bel Air neighborhood. FEMA determined otherwise. It's a good example of how, in the case of council members, if you pass an ordinance, you're able to go out into the streets and see its day-to-day operation. In our case, we're able to sit in on the scientific review panel process and see the failures of that process. I've explained those shortcomings, if you will, to the Congresswoman, and she filed a letter of protest with the FEMA administrator at the end of February. The FEMA administrator turned that down and subsequently decided that their own process was, in fact, in accordance with their regulations in the law. I'm here tonight to offer what information I have. I'm not an expert on the FEMA flood program. I'm an unwilling novice on the FEMA flood program. And I will, to the extent of my knowledge, be happy to answer any questions. It's up to FEMA at this point. They have indicated that their schedule is open and they'll schedule meetings with the public at the convenience of themselves and the city staff. So there shouldn't be a problem at this point getting information out to the community. I think a couple of messages need to be clear. First of all, if you don't have a federally backed mortgage or a private backed mortgage, in fact, if you don't have a mortgage, you're not required to purchase flood insurance under our law. If you do have a federally backed mortgage, and in most cases if you have a privately backed mortgage, you will be required. 90% of all mortgages in America are backed by the federal government. So in all probability, if you've got a mortgage, insurance is going to be required. As Mr. Tan stated, the letter that will be coming to the city will be dated around September 1st, and the requirement to have insurance will be approximately 6 months later. There will be an advantage to buying insurance and having it enforced prior to September 1st. There's a huge price advantage to doing that, and that'll be explained to the public at that time. Under the current law, I checked on Monday morning, if the public in the Bel Air neighborhood went out to buy insurance, at the moment it'd be $450 per year. The second year would be $475. Again, this is all under current law. Things could change. And after that, there's an escalation period until and I should point out, that's if you bought the insurance today before the flood map becomes effective. Once the flood map becomes effective, if you buy insurance after that point, it's a lot more expensive. So it's always more advantageous to buy the insurance before the map becomes effective. So you start out with $450, let's say, you go to $475 the second year, and then it escalates over time until it gets to what's known as the full risk rate. In other words, you start out at a subsidized rate as if there isn't a flood map in effect, and you escalate over time to the point where you get to your full risk rate. I asked, what's the full risk rate? It depends upon the house, but nationally, the time period to escalation to a full risk rate has been around 10 years. So it'll go up for 10 years until it's at the full risk rate. It'll go up at the rate of, under current law, it would go up at the rate of 15% per year. So it's a substantial increase per year. And it winds up, if you do the math, being in the neighborhood of $1,400 to $1,500 after 10 years, and that assumes that that's your full risk rate. Conceivably, you might hit the full risk rate before the 10 year or after the 10 year. It depends upon what your elevation is, basically, relative to the bay. Again, we're sorry that we're in this position. We wish we sought every possible advantage for the residents of San Bruno. Actually, we're about, I think, at least 3 years beyond what would have happened otherwise. So we've managed to use the full capacities of the law for 3 years, and here we are. So happy to answer any questions, and I'd much rather be able to talk to you now about parking permits.
We do have a question for you, Brian, but how many homes or residents, Jimmy, just to refresh?
It's approximately 500 homes.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Mr. Mayor, one other thing more. There will be a question asked of you and of everybody else whether or not private insurance is available outside the FEMA program, and that'll be explained to the public. The answer is that often private insurance is available. Sometimes it costs more, sometimes it costs less, and there are advantages and disadvantages to private insurance. My apologies for interrupting.
No, not at all. Jimmy, you alluded that wanting to schedule a community meeting with FEMA, some resistance. Ms. Perkins, you seem to allude that they're willing to come and talk to our residents.
I mean, they're not available tomorrow. They have a volcano going in Hawaii at the moment. And that's for real. That's the same staff. But they are available to talk to the public. And so far as I remember, because this happened in North Shoreview, San Mateo, they held at least 2 meetings. So I'm sure that they'll be happy to try and arrange something that's convenient. They really do want the public to understand what's going on. So.
If I could just clarify the director's statement. Yeah. We have asked and had many conversations with FEMA over the last 3 years at the council's interest and request to us to convene public meetings to do everything we possibly could to let residents know as early as possible. And that's what FEMA, I would say reluctance is a kind word. Yeah. They essentially refused. FEMA was not willing, not available to work with us in that regard until the maps were finalized. And we agreed to their map.
And they refused me as well.
And I appreciate that. I know this is, at least for me sitting up here, it's the second time dealing with FEMA, back in 2010, and then now. So let's just say that they're not my fan favorite, but I know they have a job to do. But I think our council would have the expectation that, of course, they would come here and help assist, educate, communicate, and really go down, especially with the cost savings, as you said, within the first 6 months once the letter's final. So I do want to open it up my colleagues, but I do want to say to staff and to the supervisors in the Congresswoman's office, there was a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of work. But I think that this council took that action to take the time necessary. Obviously, we spent your hours and meetings and assisting us, but I think we owed it to the residents of the community to appeal and to fight to the end, because that's what we do here in San Bruno. So I want to thank you for the staff that's done that.
And your staff did a tremendous job, and I think that your consultant probably did as good a job as anybody could have given the circumstances. I learned a great deal about the shortcomings in the scientific review panel process, and when that legislation comes up for review in about 3.5 years, we'll probably have something the Congresswoman will want to say about it. She voted against that law, by the way, to renew it in its current form, but that's a separate story tonight.
Thank you. Questions to Brian or to staff? Laura?
I guess the question I would ask is, so this meeting is public and the information is going to get out there. There's going to be a lot of questions. Will the map be posted, more information be posted maybe on our website or?
Yes, FEMA actually has numbers of publications and informational resources that will be available to the public, yes.
Great, thank you.
There's a website that's called FloodSmart, and it generally has a lot of the questions that folks would want to have answered. But most of the things that really count are, what's it going to cost to me, and what am I looking at here, and what are my options? So a lot of those things you really need to ask in public in a meeting and get them answered.
Other comments, Marty? Or questions, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I think you covered pretty much the thanks to staff and all the effort that everybody put into this. It's definitely unfortunate. Giving out bad news isn't fun. So with these meetings, does FEMA provide translators? Because we do have Spanish-speaking community, and some other languages in that neighborhood.
I can certainly ask and ask that they do that. I'm not sure that they do, but I'll certainly be happy to ask. Yeah.
And having something on our website of announcing this sooner rather than later. I know Robert's going to be asking probably some of these questions, but if I was an owner over there, I'd be very interested in getting ahead of this problem and figuring it out. So, thank you.
Thank you. Michael and Laura? Irene, anything?
I just want to say thank you, Brian, and everyone else who's been a part of this for all these years. I think I was at the very first meeting and the second meeting and the third meeting, and this staff and our staff, I have never seen people work so hard for the people of San Bruno, so I just want to thank everyone again.
Okay. And Robert, please.
Robert Rico, 7th Avenue, and I'm probably going to end up on the new map. Just to confirm, when FEMA comes out, there's no chance of them making any changes. They're just going to tell us what has to be done.
My understanding is you're correct.
Okay. And through you, will you tell Jackie thank you for continuing to work for us, and hopefully that, as you said, we can get the information out early enough so that those of us that potentially are going to have to pay for it will have some options.
Thank you, Robert. Please, of course.
Michael Barber from Supervisor Dave Pine's office. So I've been heavily involved with this, trying to predict some optimism here. Well, first of all, I want to point out that we have Erica Powell, who's our county flood resilience program manager. She's actually working on navigable slough and some of the areas around here that could potentially impact. We are looking at, from a county level, what can be done there. And there's also conversations which hopefully the city council and the city manager are aware of. There is a conversation going on about, can we create some kind of county flood organization that can address these issues on a county-wide scale and not in incremental pockets, city by city. It's a large project, and we've been working closely with the Congresswoman's office on that issue. Somewhat discussed at the water summit we had on, when was that, March 30th? The only other project I wanted to point out is there's a project called Resilience by Design. Not sure if you're familiar with that. It's been primarily focused on Colma Creek, but it does impact San Bruno Creek to a degree. Mr. Tan attended the first meeting on that. They are presenting their design projects on May 17th, 18th. That although it has focused on Colma, the lower reach of the study would benefit San Bruno. So I just want to make you aware of that project. At this point in time, it's a design concept, but I've spent a lot of time working with them on that. I'm personally very excited about it. If it can be brought forward, it will benefit the community in the long run. So trying to be optimistic in a...
Through the chair?
Yes, please.
Michael,
Yes.
before you leave the podium, even if we do those things, what effect would that have on the FEMA map, on the flood zone map? Or if we do all the projects, I know the San Francisco Airport has projects that they're contemplating, and the Colma Creek, as you said, and all the different projects that are out there. Is there a process that we then go to FEMA and say, okay, we're doing all these things, can you take this off?
Yes, though Mr. Perkins is pointing out that there's the fluvial side, which technically was not part of this. So that was where we had one of the
yes,
battles
I remember
over
that too.
things with FEMA. The idea would be, yes, that part of the work that the county folks are working on and the flood district agency, we haven't figured words out for that, but that would potentially address Riverine as well. So yes, the risk here is what's the time frame, but it's, at some point in time, yes, it could impact. We'd have to bring a letter of map revision. We'd have to appeal to FEMA to say, hey, we've done X, Y, and Z. But that would be the objective of any of these projects, is to try to change those maps with FEMA certified work.
And may I have one more question?
Yeah, please.
Has FEMA given us any indication of what what could be done from their side? Have they said, well, if you do these things, this will be...
I'll let the congressional representative...
Well, actually, the Public Works Director is saying no in part because we have a problem here of multiple jurisdictions and multiple water flows.
Yes.
So I guess in theory, the FEMA could tell you whether or not your proposed solution works. That they would definitely do, but the burden is always on the local jurisdiction to create the solution and then to test it against FEMA's model. So there will always be a solution. Whether it's a cost-effective solution from someone's perspective is another issue, and where you get the money from, of course, is yet a different issue. You can get out of a flood map. I mean, Foster City at the moment, in the June election, will decide whether or not it wants to pass a bond measure in order to keep itself out of the flood zone. And if it passes that, then the project will go forward, and quite likely, and we know their project would be certified, they would be out of the flood zone. So it does happen. It has happened in the past. It happened in the Shoreview neighborhood of San Mateo, and it's going to be happening in the next couple of years within the North Shoreview area of City of San Mateo. So those things do happen, but it's up to the city to propose the solution and to test it against FEMA's model.
Okay, thank you.
I can just feedback on that. The one other piece that's complicated here is SFO is in this mix. They were actually, even they were slammed down by FEMA. So I'm not privy to all the details. They're working on things. So what they do will impact you as well. So it's one of the reasons why one of the first studies that I had worked on was a multi-jurisdictional project in the San Bruno Colma Creek, which was SFO, San Bruno, and South San Francisco, where we were looking at some solutions. SFO is just as interested. So the upside there is they have money. So again, I'm trying to be an optimist here.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you, Michael.
appreciate that.
Thank you for staying, and thank you for updating us. Appreciate it. Vicki?
Item 9D, adopt resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a contract with Triad Consulting and System Design Group, LLC, to complete a security assessment of water and wastewater facilities in the amount not to exceed $65,065.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This item in front of you tonight is regards to the assessment of water and wastewater facilities to determine the security measures needed to secure them. The city has 26 water and wastewater facilities. That includes well sites, tanks, pump stations, and the Public Works Corporation yard. As the city is in the process of replacing and upgrading many of our facilities by investing millions of dollars, the security at these locations needs to be improved in order to prevent any vandalism or theft. Some of our well facilities have chemicals stored to treat groundwater before it's distributed into the system. Security at these facilities are needed in order to prevent someone from accessing the building without city's knowledge and tampering with equipment that could affect the water quality issues for our residents. Currently, the security measures are limited with a lock-and door for pump stations, and some of these sites have gates and fences only. With the minimum security measures, the city has experienced incidents at some of these facilities over the years. For example, intruders went behind the newly completed Olympic wastewater pump station building and lit some materials on fire, which could have caused extensive damage to the facilities if the fire went out of control. At another pump station facility, an intruder managed to get inside the building by prying the door open and stealing one of our portable generators. The city's police department has also responded to calls over the years at the Public Works Corporation yard regarding break-ins and lost property. So the completion of this project will provide the city with a better understanding of the type of security measures to install at each facility. So in order to obtain proposals, staff issued a request for proposals in January. The project scope of work includes the review of existing security measures at each of the 26 sites and identifying the deficiencies and providing recommendations to improve the security. The city received 6 proposals, ranging experience, ranging experience and qualifications, and most of these firms that submitted proposals did not have any or limited experience with evaluating water and wastewater facility security. And the majority of the proposals from various firms had experience with providing security assessment for military bases and foreign embassies. Although cost was not part of the consideration for selection of the firm, staff reviewed the costs of the services for each of the firm, and then they range from $17,000 to $85,000. So upon review of all the proposals, staff is recommending to award a contract to Triad Consulting and System Design Group. The firm has extensive experience conducting facility security assessment, mainly focusing on public infrastructure security for water and wastewater districts. The firm has completed work for agencies such as Contra Costa Water District, the Placer County Water Agencies, and Metropolitan Water District in Southern California. At the completion of the assessment, the city will receive a report documenting the findings and a list of prioritized improvement recommendations, and the report will provide specific security improvements for each of the facility and will serve as a security master plan document, which will be used as a guide for the implementation. And once the project is completed, in about 2 to 3 months, staff will review the recommendations and include the implementation costs in a future operating or capital budget for council's review. As for the fiscal impact, the 2017-22 Park and Facilities Capital Improvement Program includes this project, and with an allocation of $90,000, and there's sufficient budget to cover that cost of the project. So there's no additional appropriation is being requested at this time. This concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions to the director from council? Michael?
Through the chair. Jimmy, I had a question about the budget, because in the description it says that it's the $90,000 was supposed to cover design and installation, but this proposal would pretty much consume the entire budget. So, based on the estimates that you had done initially, do we still think that the remaining very small amount would still allow us to do any of the implementation, or is your estimate of the implementation something closer to the full 90? The
full $90,000, it's it's not going to be enough. It's, if I'm estimating it correctly, because the contract itself is about $65,000 for this assessment work, and we only have $25,000 remaining. And depending on the type of improvements that are security measures that are recommended, if they're installing fences or gates, some of these our pump stations, we don't have any fence or gates around them. So if those are included as part of the recommendations, the cost could go up substantially. So that's something that we would have to look at or review during the after we receive the report.
So are there any improvements that you're pretty comfortable with that maybe rather than doing the study, maybe if we know for a fact that a few fences and gates could significantly improve the security at certain facilities, could it make sense to maybe just invest some of this money in that up front and then maybe defer some of this until somewhere down the line for the more sophisticated solutions?
That's something that we can look at. Correct. I mean, that's some of our water pump stations don't have any fence or gates around it, but our wastewater pump stations, they do at this moment, and water tanks, they do as well. But then the building itself is not secure. If people who jump over the fence and try to access the site, we want to be able to see what's going on within the site. So maybe, but possibly they'll be installing cameras, or that could be some of the recommendations that came out of comes out of the report.
Okay. And then there's some concerns I have too about any proposed solution, because if you put up cameras, somebody's got to monitor the cameras, right, and that's probably an additional cost as well. So that's why I was concerned about if we're consuming our entire budget just in coming up with the design, and then the design is going to be for something that possibly we can't even afford. What the end result was going to be that we have a nice design that'll never be implemented, versus maybe looking for some quick short-term surefire solutions that could potentially be a better use of the money. So just throwing that out there.
Laura.
Thank you, because I have to concur 110%. I'm in agreement. I mean, I think I'd like to see you spend the $90,000 on implementing improvements. I think there's some basic things you should have. Fencing in areas where you don't have fencing, very, very well-lit areas where you don't have well-lit areas, locks that that you should have, double locks, triple locks on each piece, heavy lifted plates that get onto tank sites in areas where they can't lift it and it doesn't take one or two. I mean, just there's some things that I think you could do and spend the $90,000 instead of getting an assessment. Because I agree, you get the assessment, you figure out your master plan, great. These are all these great options, and then we just don't have funds to improve those. So I will also say that water and our water system is a vital resource, and we have to be very cautious. So if staff can take a look at the money and say this is what we can do with that, and you feel like it's not enough or we really do need the assessment, you're the experts, and I'd want to know that as well. But my recommendation would be the same as Councilmember Salazar.
Irene, did you?
It's one of those struggles between getting a good plan and implementing it. I defer to staff if they want and feel that a assessment is necessary by experts. I think that's what they should do.
Marty? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I security is important. The intrusions that we've had so far have been minor. Putting alarms at all our facilities probably is a good idea. Into any of our buildings, if we don't have alarms, that's where I would put my first dollar into. Besides the lighting that we could easily see that needs to be done, fencing. So I'm also concerned about the budget. We have budget to do this part, but after that, it's going to cost thousands and thousands more dollars to put up the cameras and to do everything. So I would like to see us put the money into actual security devices than to do a study that we'll have to figure out how we're going to pay for later.
Okay, well, we've heard from the council. I'm hearing at least 3 that are looking, my perception is looking for ways to utilize the funds and trying to implement some security measures now, whether it's fencing, alarms, lighting, etc., rather than getting the consultant out to assess and then try to implement. Is that a fair assessment, what I've said?
Yep.
I know, Irene. That was to move forward with staff's recommendation. City Attorney? On the resolution, we would just go ahead and vote it down, if that's the case?
Yes, somebody could make a motion to deny the resolution or just not take any action.
Okay, so up to council. Either we can take no action or somebody can...
I'll make a motion to deny the resolution.
Vicky?
Vice Mayor Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell?
No.
Councilmember Salazar?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your effort. Thank you for staying here. Next item.
Item 9D, adopt resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a construction contract with Alana's Construction, Inc. for the Commodore and Grundy Park Pathway Rehabilitation Project in the amount of $81,119, approving a construction contingency of $12,168 and appropriating $25,300 from the General Fund Capital Reserve Fund.
Honorable Mayor and Council, Commodore Park is a large San Bruno park. Grundy Park is a medium-sized neighborhood park, and this project that we're going to be going through is to asphalt the pathways running through both of those parks. The pathway systems themselves are deteriorating and have cracks and potholes caused by tree roots, settling, and water intrusion. This first set of pictures is an example at Commodore Park of the kinds of disruption of the pathway along where the tree roots have in fact bulged the pathway up. Similarly around the playground areas. So in the map in front of you, the paper map in front of you, you see Commodore Park in the red. The red circles are this kind of damage that we're recommending be repaired. The complete replacement of the asphalt, the removal of the tree roots, and the handwork, because the paths are relatively narrow, the work has to be done by hand, to repave the areas in red. To meet the budget, we're making recommendations that in this last picture, the picture on your right is the kind of pathway where there is no raising of the path or a limited raising of the path, that this pathway surface will not be repaired, will not have a slurry seal or a crack seal done, and that's the linear length along the sort of parallel with the freeway behind the baseball field and the dog park that would not be included in the staff's recommendation for the repair of this park. At Grundy Park, more pictures of this as we go through. I'm sorry, I'm hitting the wrong button here. Grundy is a similar area on the Grundy map in front of you. The red circle is immediately around the picnic area, and it also has the raised asphalt and the broken pathway. And the picture to the right here is an example of the pathway that's in black on your map that will not be included in the staff's recommendation. The parks were bid as two separate projects. Commodore Park was the base bid and Grundy Park as an add alternate bid. In order to reduce overall project costs and better align with the budget, the repair work is recommended to be completed with only the vital areas of paving around the picnic areas completed. The Commodore pathway would replace approximately 6,000 square feet of asphalt, and the Grundy Park pathway would replace approximately 1,300 square feet of asphalt, too damaged to repair around the picnic table areas. And in Commodore's example, too damaged around the play areas. Park pathways would not be included in the work. The revised project cost to complete Commodore Park and Grundy Park as proposed and recommended by staff is just over $97,290, which fits the budget. It's recommended that the city allow a deductive change order, which is simply we're going to change order to remove the pathway repair, so that the pathways will include only the vital and most damaged areas of the pathway. After the contract award, staff will meet with the contractor to schedule the work. I've met with the contractor. They can start work by the end of the month, and it's anticipated that they'll be able to complete all the work within 30 calendar days. The recommendation is to adopt the resolution authorizing the city manager to execute the construction contract with Alaniz Construction for Commodore and Grundy Park Pathway Rehabilitation Project in the amount of $31,119, also approving a construction contingency of $12,168 and appropriating $25,300 from the General Fund Capital Reserve to fund the complete project as staff is recommending it. Staff is available for any questions you might have.
Questions from council? Laura?
At Grundy Park, the area that's not going to be paved, the photo on the left-hand side, there's not a lot of that though, right? I mean,
Correct.
Yeah, so I know we're seeing that in the small area. Is it still possible to do a patch on if there are some small sections like that?
Well, this project has about $12,000 in contingency fund, and typically that contingency fund is used for infrastructure problems. You find a sewer pipe that's broken or some other pipe. We might have some smaller versions of that across the park with because Grundy does, they both have bathrooms. Grundy does have the bathroom right up against the path. And with the council's approval, we can make the modification to expand some of the patching or the slurry seal to these kinds of isolated areas. But we were looking for a consistent look, and the only way to do that is for about another $25,000. We can do the slurry and patch seal, but as we discussed in the previous it's not in the budget. You're already authorizing $25,000 over out of the general fund now. But I can use the contingency fund to do exactly the thing that you're suggesting.
Well, I appreciate the options to actually not pave certain areas, and I think even at Commodore Park, that pathway doesn't really get used. It's behind the field, so I think perfect where you're suggesting that we recommend redoing the pathway. I would just say maybe at Grundy Park, I recommend that some of the areas like the image on the left does get patched, but there's not a lot of it, so.
Other comments? Go ahead, Marty.
Just want to make sure I'm understanding from the staff report that you will be doing crack fill and sealing. It says in the staff report, so you're telling me that we're not going to do that?
Correct. I outlined all the options, the original bid, which is do all the pathways and all the slurry seal and all the crack sealing. The budget associated with that was out of reach. So with a deductive change order, I'm suggesting that we not do any slurry seal or crack seal of the areas that are in black on your map. The areas that are in red, they'll either be completely replaced or touched up if appropriate, but most of that is all going to be, it's in bad enough condition. I'm going to take it all out, remove the roots, start over with new asphalt paving. the hope is that with your approval to use the contingency fund, as we see how it's going, we're not running into any big infrastructure issues, the contractor's behaving appropriately, we can use some of the contingency funds to appropriately slurry seal or crack seal, but we will, for this money, we will not be able to do the entire park in either place.
Okay, and so you have a cost bid item for crack sealing and slurry that is on the additional part of the work. So you could,
yes,
you have already a price determined on that.
Yes.
Right, all right.
We have a unit price for both facilities that we can expand as the contingency money is available.
All right. So I went there last night and I walked it, both parks. So the consistency in the width of our paths. At Grundy, it's 4 feet. At Commodore, it's along that one play, or not around the play structure. I mean, it's like 10 feet over there. Around this, the one in the middle, it's also 10 feet in some certain areas, and it's kind of like, well, if it was less of an area, if you cut that in half, you'd be able to do twice the amount of repairs. So that's my first question is have you looked at maybe not make it in the pathway so big, because I believe over at City Park too, our pathways are around 4 foot. So that's one way to extend the length of your work. My concern also is when you take out roots, you know, it kind of could impact the tree, and maybe there's some ways on the center part where you can change the route of the path and meet up on that would be the north side of it instead of staying on the south side, so that you would not have to deal with the roots ever again, because you can see where there's no roots. And as for the repair, I just want to understand the scope, that you're digging down 6 inches, putting base rock, 6 inches of base rock, and 3 inches of pavement?
Yes.
Okay. Those are kind of my suggestions of how you can maybe do some value engineering and trying to reroute things. I mean, but clearly Commodore is in horrendous shape, and getting that done is really important. I'm sure you're going to find the money to do some crack sealing, because if we don't do anything on that, it's just going to get worse. It didn't look as bad to need really a slurry. It would look a lot nicer if we slurried it, of course, but slurry's pretty cheap too. So those are my comments, and finding how maybe we could save a little bit of money of redirecting those paths and maybe decreasing the width, because they're 4 feet everywhere else, and something to think about.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from council? Irene?
I'm concerned of throwing out the idea of shortening the width. That's a tremendous amount of work to take out asphalt and put in turf to fill in where you took the asphalt out. So can we just have staff figure it out?
Well, it's a lot cheaper to put turf or put seed down than put asphalt down.
But okay, I'm not going to argue. I'll introduce the resolution to approve.
Wait. I apologize. No, I just had a question. Did you have any?
Thank you. I was actually going to ask about the dog run, if it were making progress on it, because I was wondering if we're going to do some asphalt there, could it make sense to bid out a bigger project that included the dog run and some of this path, or is that just so far out that we're not going to consider it now?
At this point, exactly that. This project is so far along, and we're still not close with the dog park. We don't have the architect on board yet. The city manager and I have talked about a variety of ideas on managing and organizing and rebuilding, or adding to what the community has already addressed and announced that their intentions. In fact, when we walked the park today. One of the dog park users was ready for the calendar. Are we next on the schedule? They were very anxious to get it, but it's this budget is so tight and so limited. The ability to expand more asphalt into that isn't ready. We don't know where to put it yet.
Okay.
Would be the easy answer.
All right. Thank you.
So you've heard some comments, routes or whether you take them out, which grow back, and so, and would our staff be doing routes if you do routes, or is it them?
The routes, like the city park project, are ours. We've got it figured out. We will work alongside them for the route cutting, the route barriers that go down to keep them from coming back. And yes, we are looking at what kind of minor modifications we can look to the location and the routing, but at this unit price is so good, it actually doesn't pencil out well to decide which public access, ADA, the routes around that playground, and then redo irrigation controls, and whatever we would replace in the gap. So at this point, the unit price here is very, very competitive, and so we will be making some on-site moves and hopefully use some of the contingency to, when we find a way that we can do it better, we certainly will.
Okay, and my final comment, and then I'll hand it over to you, Irene. Contingencies are there for those things that come up that we cannot predict. So I understand some comments came up, and I'm just speaking for myself. I don't want that to be perceived as, hey, we have extra as we walk into this project, because I want to make sure that we're getting done what we've agreed to get done before we go outside that, because we can't predict what we're going to find, correct?
Agreed, and that the contractor has a set amount, the deductive is set, and then it's our decision after that, not theirs.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead, Irene. You going to introduce? Okay. Any action from council? Mr. Resolution.
I'll introduce the resolution.
Councilmember Salazar.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Davis.
Aye.
Mayor Medina.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Comments from council members? Anyone? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Irene.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I just want to thank everyone here who came to Operation Clean Sweep. It was a fabulous day. We had over 170 volunteers who came out and did such things as plant trees and pull weeds and plant flowers in the flower pots on San Mateo Avenue. We had people picking up garbage and recycling, and it was a fabulous day. So thank you, staff, and council members were all there, and thank you, San Bruno residents who came to volunteer.
Michael.
So my comment is around the work that we're doing downtown, and I asked staff and was told that we're not putting cleanouts into the new laterals that are going in down there. And personally, I think it's a missed opportunity for us when we're already in the ground, we're completely relocating those lines, to not put those cleanouts in. And I know it's an additional expense, not an insignificant additional expense, but especially in a commercial area where fat, oil, and grease get into the system, I think it would be really in the city's interest to include that as part of this work. And I don't know that it may be too late for some of them, but if there's an opportunity to do some of that, I wanted to get council's concurrence that that's something that should be a policy for us when we are doing new construction and the opportunity presents itself to make those improvements. So just wanted to put that out there and see if I could get the council to agree.
I mean, I would do that with my own home, which I did. So I'd like to hear what staff has to say.
Mr. Mayor, if I may
Please.
make a quick comment. Based on previous conversation with the City Council, it is not our policy to routinely replace laterals when we are doing a sewer mainline project. It was done in this case specifically because the sewer line was relocated, and therefore the locations of the laterals needed to be changed in many locations. In discussing this via email with Councilmember Salazar, I learned that we did not install the cleanouts. The director has just confirmed that it is now too late to do that as part of this project. But the cost was fairly significant, as the council member indicated. It was our bid price for installation of the laterals was already relatively high at $8,000 per location, and the addition of the cleanouts would have added between $500 and $1,000 per location. I believe there were approximately 45 locations, so that's roughly correct. Going forward, we would appreciate, although we do not anticipate that there will be a large number of situations where we would be replacing the laterals. This is a private owner responsibility to maintain, to replace the laterals, so it is not routinely what we do. But in future cases where we do, for some reason that would otherwise damage the property owner, we would certainly accept your direction to install cleanouts if that's the council's pleasure.
And thank you, Connie, for that. And that's really what I was just looking for, is maybe in a going forward thing, if we could, if the council concurs, of course, that our policy would be that we would start looking at opportunities to do that. I realized that I saw that sidewalks were already going back in, so I figured it was probably too late for this project. But definitely going forward, if ever there's an opportunity for us to do that, or in maybe in the residential areas where we offer an opportunity for residents to somehow participate in in the project and get laterals done with cleanouts while the streets are open.
So we have some experts in the audience. Maybe I could just ask, is it new construction when a new lateral is being replaced or installed? Is it already the requirement that the property owner install a cleanout, or is that optional?
It's optional, and there's also, it becomes like a tricky, like much on San Mateo Ave.
Dennis, I'm sorry, could you come to that?
For new construction, you're required to do. They should have done it.
So it's optional, and also it becomes a little tricky because the sewer mains sometimes aren't always in the middle of the street. Much like on San Mateo Avenue, there's really no setback, and some of the buildings, the faces of the buildings, some are farther out towards the sidewalk, some are farther back. So in some cases, there's literally no room. Also, once you put a clean out, on a public sidewalk like that, if the top of the cleanout comes off, then it also becomes a tripping hazard. So there's other things that come into play with these cleanouts, much different than in a neighborhood where it's behind the sidewalk. It's 2 to 3 to 5 feet back, behind the setback, where it's a little bit more controlled. It's not necessarily where pedestrians are walking on the sidewalk. So there are a lot of things that come into play. Some sewer mains are in backyards. Some sewer mains are just a couple feet in from the sidewalk. So it really depends where you're at. And when we put these projects together, we take into account basically what is going to be entailed on where we're doing the main and how we can make a connection to the actual private lateral.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Nothing's ever easy, is it?
I'm sorry.
So to get back to your question, Michael, I think that there are at least, I've already heard from, I'm counting myself, but there 3 council members at least that would like to, as far as policy 4.
You're saying it's a council consensus that wherever possible, when we're doing sewer lateral replacements, which is not the norm, that we would include a clean out.
Or when we're doing any major sewer, even working on the mains, but if the street's going to be open and there's an opportunity to do something above what's normal, of course, factoring in however much budget we have and everything else, but at least consider it and maybe try to be a little more proactive in dealing with those laterals.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you. Marty.
I just wanted to let everybody know, if you didn't go to Cappuccino this last Friday, there was an incredible performance by our growing renaissance of musicians. Parkside had their band there. It was just amazing. I had to leave early, but if you haven't gone in a while to Cappuccino and saw their performance center, it's really spectacular. So I encourage everybody to attend the next one, and I believe Cappuccino won another first place in at least 2 first places in their last competition. So they're really doing a great job, Parkside and Cappuccino.
And then, sure, I'll join. And Irene, I wanted to thank you. You had good weather, and it was you did that. I'll give you credit. But to the group that does it every year, and thank you. It was successful. I know the assignment that we were given, it was a good assignment, and I appreciate that. Learned a lot as we met the merchants on San Mateo Avenue. And I do want to circle back, Jimmy, to your discussion on FEMA. I will say that, in my opinion, the report that you gave, and I felt passion, and I felt that you had worked hard. You did the best you could, and you really, and your team and the staff, gave it their all. And that's what we asked, and we very much appreciate that, and I just wanted to reiterate that. If there be nothing else, we do have a closed session. It will be a conference with real property negotiations pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.8, properties at 500 Acacia Avenue and 201 Balboa Way in San Bruno. We will be adjourning this meeting, and the next regular City Council meeting will be held on May 22nd at 7 p.m. right here at the San Bruno Senior Center. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your week.